So there I was, clocking in as the undisputed king of the jungle and a newly minted, highly unqualified radioactive lizard dad. My first official parenting duty involved utilizing my trademark atomic breath to whip up a gourmet dinner for a tiny human who literally just dropped into my lap. Little did my scaly brain comprehend. This pint-sized toddler was actually a legendary Supreme Empress who had undergone a rather aggressive cosmic reboot. In her past life, she commanded 9 heavens and ruled supreme, only to get thoroughly backstabbed by her absolute favorite person in a classic betrayal arc. Talk about a brutal Monday morning commute into the afterlife, except she somehow managed to reincarnate right back into her cute 5-year-old self. To top off that already stressful schedule, she got dumped directly into a savage forest where I happened to reign as the apex terror. Ancient mythical beasts and ferocious white tigers practically trembled and bowed their majestic heads the second my massive tail dragged across the turf. Living the ultimate overpowered lifestyle meant my daily routine consisted entirely of alternating between deep naps and eating glowing rocks. Just as I was getting comfortable with the idea of coasting through retirement, a tiny, tear-streaked squeak shattered my peaceful afternoon nap. I immediately tracked the frantic audio signature through the thick canopy, while the reincarnated monarch was busy plotting bloody vengeance without noticing immediate danger. Out of nowhere, a pack of 7 or 8 muscular shadow wolves ambushed the clearing, scaring the absolute daylight out of the poor kid. If she had been in her prime, she could have swatted them away like pesky summer gnats with a flick of her wrist. Unfortunately, she was currently stuck as an utterly defenseless little kid whose only survival instinct was screaming bloody murder for help. One particularly impatient wolf bared its rotting fangs and lunged straight for her jugular with zero hesitation. Right at that microsecond of absolute life-or-death panic, a furious shockwave exploded from the distance like a tactical missile strike. Half of the snarling wolf pack was instantly vaporized into glowing cosmic dust, while the terrified survivors scattered like absolute cowards. A towering, apocalyptic-scale monster then materialized right in front of her, trembling, tear-filled eyes. Even as an ancient empress reborn, she felt her soul freeze solid under the sheer, suffocating weight of my radioactive aura. While she was definitely saved from becoming a wolf snack, it seriously felt like jumping straight out of the frying pan into an even scarier volcano. I looked down at this ridiculously tiny human, instantly feeling a massive wave of protective fondness wash over my cold reptilian heart. Her miniature face was just way too aggressively cute to handle, which clearly broke several universal laws of physics. Moving with all the gentleness I could muster, I scooped her terrified, squirming little body up into my giant razor-sharp claws. My chest was practically glowing with parental pride, completely ignoring the fact that I looked like a cinematic nightmare. Suddenly, a glowing blue notification window flashed right in front of my reptilian eyeballs with a cheerful chime. System alert, matched with a surviving human infant, initiating the ultimate dad protocol right now. Seeing this completely random game menu pop up alongside my new grumpy daughter meant I had to accept the quest immediately. The system cheerfully announced that my kid's internal energy channels were totally unstable and demanded a feast within 60 flat minutes. Panic instantly set in because my usual diet consisted exclusively of crunching raw uranium chunks or sunbathing near nuclear waste sites. There was zero chance I was letting my delicate little princess chew on radioactive granite unless I wanted her to shatter every single baby tooth. Sweeping my glowing, predatory gaze across my massive territory, the entire forest suddenly transformed into an upscale supermarket. I casually checked out the Hydra district, but concluded that dealing with all those extra heads would be way too much weekend chores. Next, I briefly scanned the deep-sea giant catfish territory, but worried those pesky bones might cause a choking hazard. Finally, my glowing eyes locked straight onto the dread lion domain, rumored to possess pure sacred beast blood with maximum nutritional value. My vision practically turned into cartoon dollar signs as I pictured that majestic beast sizzling nicely in a pool of aromatic spices. Looking down at the bewildered kid in my palm, I rumbled in my deepest, most comforting monster voice that Daddy was making barbecue. She froze mid-expression, her tiny royal brain completely short-circuiting as she tried to process being adopted by a radioactive monster. Before she could even begin untangling that absolute mess of logic, I cranked my jaws open wide to charge up. A blinding wave of concentrated blue energy surged through my throat before erupting forward with a deafening sonic boom. That devastating beam crossed miles of wilderness in a microsecond, slamming directly into the snoozing dread lion king. A magnificent mushroom cloud blossomed across the horizon, easily outshining the local sun and making nearby wildlife question their life choices. The shockwave was so violently intense that the tiny empress stood there with her jaw permanently dropped and eyes wide open. Even during the absolute peak of her ancient glory days, she had never witnessed a casual display of such ridiculous, destructive force. As the radioactive smoke slowly cleared, a massive steaming crater dominated the landscape with a freshly roasted gourmet feast sitting right in the center. Deciding the timing was finally chef-kiss perfection, I casually carried her over and gently set her down on the scorched grass. I grabbed a chunk of the sizzling meat, gave a satisfied nod, and sliced off a tender bite with my massive claw. Leaning down close, I proudly offered the steaming delicacy and asked her to taste old Dad's signature cooking. The stubborn little monarch stubbornly puffed out her royal cheeks, crossing her tiny arms while vowing she would rather starve than accept enemy takeout. Despite her fierce royal pride, Her traitorous stomach completely betrayed her with a loud rumble, forcing the tiny monarch to hesitantly grab the sizzling barbecue and take a bite. Instantly, a warm surge of energy flooded down her throat, rapidly repairing her withered spiritual dantian and sparking a fresh wave of magic. Watching my little girl enjoy the meal with such adorable expressions completely melted my radioactive heart, and the system chimed to announce a flawless victory. Reward unlocked. Junior Burning Godzilla form, instantly flooding my massive veins with overwhelming new power that made me sneeze out a tiny spark of pure joy. Parenting was officially the best life choice ever, but before I could celebrate, a fresh side quest popped up, demanding a peaceful nap for the sleepy toddler. Naturally, a crater scorched by atomic breath was way too noisy for a baby, so I immediately targeted a majestic nearby sacred mountain with fresh air and great scenery. Ignoring her utterly shocked little face, I casually strolled over while shaking the earth with every single step, casually shattering the mountain's ancient defensive barrier with a gentle tap of my giant claw. I gently laid her down beneath a cozy, sheltered canopy of giant trees where she could sleep safe from wind and rain. Just as I was admiring her peaceful snoozing face, an ear-splitting roar shattered the tranquility as a 100-foot-tall primordial demon ape burst out of a cave demanding blood for trespassing. But the second that hulking beast laid eyes on my towering radioactive silhouette, his apocalyptic rage evaporated into pure survival panic. I simply glared down and raised a giant finger to my lips, mentally broadcasting a strict whisper, telling the oversized gorilla to keep his voice down because my daughter was sleeping. That terrifying warning scared the wits right out of the mighty ape, causing him to scurry over like a well-behaved puppy to fan her gently with a giant leaf. The little empress peeked through her eyelashes at this surreal scene, her tense face softening just a tiny bit as she mentally jotted down her very first diary entry. Reborn Day 1. Rescued by a clumsy giant beast, and though his magic was terrifyingly overpowered, she decided to tolerate him for now since he saved her life. Finishing that thought with a sigh of relief, she closed her eyes again, giving me my first genuine taste of high-tier dad satisfaction, before I suddenly noticed the giant gorilla staring awkwardly nearby. I glared down and muttered a sarcastic remark, asking if the overgrown monkey wanted to volunteer to become my daughter's personal squeaky toy. That casual question completely short-circuited the ancient demon ape's brain, sending him crashing to his knees in a desperate panic while remembering that exact same atomic beam from earlier. Terrified for his furry life, he bolted like a golden streak into his cave and emerged seconds later carrying a massive pile of ultra-rare legendary treasures just to buy his freedom. Those glowing mystical items could easily start apocalyptic wars across the mortal realm, but to the groveling ape, they were just cheap life insurance. I stared blankly at the shiny trinkets with zero clue how to use them, but the system immediately dropped a brand new interior design side quest requiring me to decorate her bedroom. Looking at the sparkly loot and the flattering ape, I decided the hairy beast actually had decent taste and started arranging the glowing gems around my sleeping daughter. The clattering noise eventually woke the tiny monarch up, and when she opened her sleepy eyes, she nearly had a heart attack. The casual decorations scattered around her were actually legendary celestial stones that drove gods insane and 9-hole mystic fruits that could instantly ascend mortals to supreme power. Seeing supreme treasures used as cheap nursery decor made her face twitch in pure agony, forcing her to mentally update her diary with a grudging note. Apparently, her adoptive monster lacked both basic intellect and normal aesthetic taste, yet she had to admit these ridiculous shiny rocks were secretly doing wonders for her recovering magic. While she quietly plotted her cosmic comeback in her head, I happily finished arranging the glittery junk, though I squinted at the final layout, feeling like something vital was still missing. With a thunderous bellow echoing across the horizon, 2 exceptionally flamboyant exotic birds fluttered over in sheer terror, trembling as I pointed my massive claws and demanded they sing a bedtime lullaby for my kid. Paralyzed by my overwhelming radioactive aura, the poor feathered creatures reluctantly warbled away, though absolute panic completely butchered their legendary singing voices into a horrendous, ear-shattering screech. That apocalyptic screech aggressively pierced through the sleeping tiny monarch's delicate soul, making her furrow her brows in unbearable agony, until she finally snapped and completely forgot all her Supreme Empress dignity. Launching straight up from the ground, she glared at the giant source of noise and shrieked at the top of her lungs that Daddy was way too noisy. The absolute second those 2 forbidden words slipped past her lips, she froze like she had just been struck by a tactical lightning bolt and frantically slapped her tiny hands over her mouth. Absolute panic surged through her brain as she mentally short-circuited over accidentally calling a monstrous lizard dad, immediately blaming the tone-deaf birds for ruining her royal filter. Hearing those magical words practically shattered my emotional defenses, leaving me standing there with tears of pure joy streaming down my scaly face because she finally acknowledged me. Recovering from that wave of parental euphoria, I glared at the 2 terrified birds and casually swatted them into next week so they could go cry to their mothers. Turning back to the slightly embarrassed toddler with my gentlest monster smile, I reassured her that Dad took care of the noise, prompting her to happily tuck herself back in for a nap. Dawn broke over the mystical peaks, waking the little Empress up to a brilliantly cozy morning where she felt exceptionally well-rested and shockingly revitalized. The surrounding pile of divine treasures and the 100-foot primordial demon ape standing at rigid attention like a loyal royal guard created a surreal, ultra-luxurious nursery vibe. Bathing in that concentrated aura of heavenly treasures effortlessly expanded her recovering spiritual dantian, proving that the absolute peak of lazy cultivation was undeniably fantastic. Noticing her waking up, I happily bounced over and eagerly asked if she slept well, earning a slightly awkward nod from the kid who still had zero idea how to handle this bizarre family dynamic. Right on cue, a helpful system chime echoed in my skull announcing her stable mood and fresh quest. Construct a durable, highly entertaining, and deeply sentimental toy. The reward promised a brand new junior gravity manipulation skill, though my tired brain instantly stalled because my past life was just endless corporate overtime, while my current hobby involves sunbathing near radiation leaks. Desperate for inspiration, I remembered an ancient legendary mountain range packed with outrageously dense, ultra-durable stones that would make a killer chew toy for a toddler. I eagerly told her to sit tight while Daddy went shopping, leaving the tiny monarch completely bewildered and flashing immediate red flags of impending doom. Zooming across the skies at supersonic speed, I arrived within minutes at the sacred dragon graveyard, where ancient primordial dragon spirits supposedly slumbered under a suffocating layer of supreme martial pressure. My glowing golden pupils swept across the ancient terrain before locking directly onto the pulsating core of the legendary dragon vein, prompting me to dive straight inside like an uninvited contractor. Parked right in the middle was a colossal, glowing dragon spine radiating terrifying divine majesty, which I inspected with an appreciative nod before casually ripping it out of the ground with zero effort. The entire mountain range violently convulsed in seismic rage as millions of translucent dragon souls materialized from the cracks of the earth, looking for absolute blood. Giving them a profoundly annoyed scowl, I muttered that they were making way too much noise and immediately started carving the massive bone into a custom toy. The ghostly dragon ancestors were genuinely shaking with fury until they actually recognized my towering radioactive silhouette, at which point their rage instantly evaporated into desperate, whimpering self-preservation. Finishing the intricate carving job in record time, I held up the custom dragon bone masterpiece with a satisfied smirk and started flying home like a proud craftsman. The sky, full of bewildered dragon ghosts, stood there in total mortification until one brave soul respectfully bowed toward my receding figure, prompting every single spectral dragon to drop to their knees in uniform submission. Arriving back at the nursery in record time, I proudly bounced over and handed the heavy toy to the astonished kid, eagerly waiting for her review. Her tiny pink hands grabbed the gift, and the microsecond her fingers brushed the bone, an overwhelming surge of pristine ancestral dragon chi flooded her veins and left her completely paralyzed. Holding a legendary supreme relic that had been nourished by 10,000 generations of true dragons, her face flushed beet red as an absolute tidal wave of mixed emotions broke her brain. Diving back into her spiritual sea, she frantically updated her diary to record that this bizarre beast possessed negative IQ, coupled with astronomical financial ruin, carving a sacred dragon spine into a mere toddler plaything as absolute proof of impending systemic collapse. Before she could even finish hyperventilating over the sheer audacity of my parenting choices, a deafening wave of thunderous dragon roars shook the heavens as thousands of spectral dragons suddenly materialized above. Surging across the trembling horizon like an unstoppable celestial storm, the massive army of spectral dragons arrived at the sacred peak with apocalyptic fury. The shivering demon ape near us nearly jumped out of his furry skin, squeaking in utter terror that the legendary dragon clan must have had their ancestral graves completely desecrated. Clutching her custom dragon bone toy tightly, the tiny empress prepared to unleash those deeply humiliating yet miraculously effective magic words. The absolute second things turned south. Sensing a hostile foreign force eyeing my daughter's shiny new chew toy, a heavy wave of irritation instantly ignited deep within my radioactive core. Both terrifying factions locked into an intense, deadlocked standoff, while time itself felt frozen in place, until the trembling demon ape instantly face-planted into the dirt out of sheer self-preservation. The golden dragon soul leading the massive airborne horde shook violently before instantly adjusting his posture, bowing low and proclaiming, "Welcome to the primal dragon god ancestor, returning to the holy grounds." That earth-shattering declaration completely short-circuited both my brain and the little monarch's logic, wondering how a radioactive lizard had any business being a divine dragon ancestor. Terrified by our silence, the golden dragon spirit babbled frantically, that sensing the ancient supreme spine being awakened by the exact matching aura confirmed our undisputed ancestral lineage. Glancing down at the kid holding my carving project, I realized I accidentally raided our neighbor's family crypt, though I remained completely baffled as to why they were thrilled instead of furious. Desperate to please, the golden dragon immediately offered a glowing drop of ancestral dragon heartblood as a tribute, sending the tiny monarch into a state of absolute shock. Staring at the legendary divine drop capable of forging supreme cosmic foundations, a wild, unprecedented ambition violently exploded across her brilliant royal mind. Slipping back into her mental spiritual sea, she viciously revised her entire life strategy, deciding that petty revenge was way too small-scale and vowing to conquer the entire chaotic Forbidden Zone instead. Absorbing the pristine heartblood instantly plunged her into a blazing cosmic furnace, refining her meridian channels until her foundation shattered past her previous peak era limits. Opening her glowing eyes while surveying the kneeling dragons and the terrified gorilla, She calculated that subjugating the remaining regional bosses would make settling old scores an absolute breeze. Flashing her most angelic toddler smile, she looked right up at my scaly face and sweetly asked if the cool dragon uncles could take her out for an airborne joyride. Hearing my precious daughter make a cheerful request meant dropping everything to fulfill it, so I mentally commanded the golden dragon leader to pack up the kid and start flying. The poor spectral leader stammered that their intangible soul forms lacked solid physical bodies to safely carry our glorious little ancestor, making me frown at how weak and undernourished these spiritual freeloaders looked. Instantly remembering a western valley carpeted in soul-devouring mystic flowers that served as ultimate spiritual nutrition for ghosts, I grabbed my daughter and declared we were going on a field trip. The massive army of trailing dragon spirits dutifully followed our march while the smart demon apes scrambled right behind us to cling to the biggest radioactive power source available. Deep inside the western flower valley, the ancient soul flower queen violently jerked awake as a terrifying pressure approached, instantly whipping up a dense canopy of eerie purple tentacles to defend her territory. Before she could finish her intimidating villain's speech, a devastating pillar of roaring blue atomic energy obliterated the horizon, instantly vaporizing her entire floral domain into glowing cosmic fertilizer. Before the trembling flower queen could even process the sudden assault, I leaped straight into her domain and firmly ordered her to water my newly adopted minions with her purest spiritual energy. Paralyzed by pure, unadulterated terror, she didn't dare utter a single word of hesitation, as millions of glowing, pristine essence buds bloomed and showered the ghostly dragon army with supreme nourishment. Watching their spectral forms rapidly solidify and power up under the glowing floral shower, the little empress lounging in my arms flashed a wickedly ambitious grin at the sheer momentum of her unfolding global conquest. Suddenly, remembering that rolling around in chaotic wastelands meant her hair was due for a proper scrubbing, she gently tugged my scaly thumb and sweetly requested a hot bath. Naturally, granting my daughter's first ever bath request required top-tier preparation, prompting the system to chime with a shiny new quest for a sparkling, spiritually charged bathing sanctuary. Scanning the western perimeter, my glowing eyes locked onto a famously dark, sluggish river that clearly needed a heavy dose of atomic sanitation before it was remotely fit for a princess. The moment I marched toward the gloomy banks, the terrified demon ape and the hovering dragon spirits frantically trailed behind like an obedient royal escort. Stepping closer to the legendary underworld river branch, a lethal waterway where a single droplet could incinerate true immortals, the trailing spirits instantly broke out into a cold sweat of absolute horror. Realizing the water looked entirely too filthy for my precious kid, I cracked open my massive jaws and fired a concentrated, blazing purification beam that instantly scrubbed the toxic abyss into a crystal-clear thermal hot spring. That aggressive landscaping project instantly summoned an angry underworld envoy rising from the depths to demand my soul as compensation for messing with cosmic property rules. Before that noisy phantom could even finish his dramatic entrance speech, I casually blew a puff of hot radioactive air through my nostrils and blasted him straight into glowing cosmic vapor. Setting the little monarch down with the utmost gentleness, I proudly gestured to the pristine steaming oasis and told her the bath was ready. Tucking herself comfortably into the warm water with only her tiny head poking out, she drifted back into her mental spiritual sea to enthusiastically update her royal diary. Apparently, vaporizing underworld rivers and rewriting regional laws proved that her revenge scheme no longer needed subtlety, since her upcoming enemies should honestly feel honored to witness her divine ascension. Meanwhile, in a pitch-black cosmic citadel far away, the Supreme Underworld King violently snapped his eyes open after sensing a vital branch of the reincarnation river being permanently erased from existence. A panicked judge rushed in to report that the chaotic Forbidden Zone tributary had vanished alongside all station scouts, plunging the furious ruler into an immediate rage. Dismissing the muffled chaos, the Nether King bellowed for the infamous black and white guards to tear open space and drag the insolent troublemaker straight back to hell in chains. Moments later, those two ghostly enforcers materialized right in front of our cozy hot spring, aggressively scanning the area for the culprits behind the missing river currents. Their arrogant attitude instantly evaporated the exact microsecond. Their hollow eyes drifted upward and locked onto my massive, mountain-like radioactive silhouette towering above them. The sheer, suffocating weight of my ancient primordial aura crashed down on their spectral forms, making them realize my terrifying presence made their own underworld boss feel like a minor neighborhood nuisance. As those two ghost enforcers stood frozen in absolute terror, I slowly opened my giant golden eyes and fixed a piercing, furious glare right at their trembling souls, causing them to scramble backward in a pathetic, clumsy panic and flee for their lives. Back in the dim chambers of the underworld palace, the mighty Nether King sat in heavy silence waiting for a triumphant return, only for two frantic, weeping shadows to burst through the heavy doors and collapse in hysterics. Panting with total horror, the guards stammered that a supreme, untouchable taboo entity ruled the chaotic Forbidden Zone, capable of shattering their souls with a single casual glance. The Nether King's pupils violently contracted as he demanded to know what heinous crime had provoked such wrath, only to learn that the terrifying monster was using the legendary reincarnation river as a makeshift bathtub to pamper his little girl. Shocked beyond measure, a massive wave of suffocating aura erupted from the throne, before the underworld ruler abruptly snapped back to his senses, realizing that anyone capable of reducing his elite enforcers to whimpering cowards entirely surpassed mortal comprehension. Calculating the catastrophic cost of a pointless war that could instantly obliterate his entire underworld empire, he swiftly swallowed his royal pride and issued an absolute decree. From this second onward, all pathways leading to the chaotic Forbidden Zone were officially sealed as a permanent no-go dead zone, strictly forbidding any underworld official from ever approaching, whispering, or even glancing in that direction, under pain of eternal annihilation in the infinite hells. This rapid succession of cowardly commands left every single ghost and deity stunned at how utterly petrified their almighty king had suddenly become. Meanwhile, across the vast expanses of the central continent, an ancient reclusive master inside a hidden sect sat across from a white-haired elder, completely bewildered by the sudden disappearance of all death chi surrounding the forbidden grounds. Pinching his fingers to calculate the heavenly secrets, he immediately coughed up a mouthful of fresh blood as an aggressive karmic backlash battered his senses, only fueling his fierce curiosity instead of deterring him. Barking an order for his top investigative elder to pack the Supreme Divine Mirror artifact, he warned the seasoned master to only observe from a safe distance and under no circumstances venture deep inside. Carrying the legendary treasure meant for spying on gods, the elder vanished into a swift breeze of wind and arrived days later at a remote mountain peak overlooking the Forbidden Zone. After frantically erecting dozens of heavy concealment arrays to protect his location, he carefully injected a surge of primordial mana into the Divine Mirror and chanted the ancient opening spell. The polished mirror surface instantly flickered to life, projecting the deep interior of the Forbidden Zone, though the veteran elder's jaw dropped when he saw zero signs of epic divine warfare or hidden treasures. Instead, the projection revealed a massive, mountain-like radioactive beast peacefully standing by a crystal-clear hot spring while gently bathing a cute little human girl in an absurdly cozy domestic scene. Completely brain-fried by the surreal contrast, the elder instinctively tried to push the mirror's focus further for a closer look, entirely unaware that the tiny monarch resting by the water had just sensed the invisible mental intrusion. Recognizing the distinct aura of the heavenly secret sect's sacred spyglass, the little empress narrowed her eyes with a playful smirk, knowing her adoptive radioactive dad absolutely despised being watched while hanging out with his daughter. Slipping effortlessly into her mental spiritual sea, she grabbed her imaginary pen to update her revenge diary, noting that some ancient fossil was using a cheap-looking glass to spy on them, while predicting that the artifact was about to shatter into dust. The exact microsecond her mental entry finished, I suddenly snapped my massive head around, locking my glowing golden sun-like pupils directly onto the spatial coordinates and staring straight through the mirror right into the horrified elder's eyes. Crack went the legendary divine artifact as millions of spiderweb fractures instantly webbed across the surface, emitting a pitiful, overloaded shriek before completely exploding into glittering powder right in the elder's trembling palms. A fresh torrent of crimson blood violently erupted from the elder's mouth as his soul felt like it had been crushed by an invisible tectonic hammer, stripping every ounce of color from his terrified face. Desperate for survival, he didn't even hesitate to ignite his precious life essence and burn his core blood to execute his absolute fastest escape technique, scurrying back toward his sect like a beaten stray dog. Days later, he crashed through the grand gates, looking like a shredded sack of trash, managing only to gasp out a single soul-shattering sentence to his terrified sectmaster before plunging the entire organization into eternal, paralyzed silence. Do not speak of it. Do not observe it. Do not attempt to measure it. Back at the cozy hot spring, after wrapping up the bath and meticulously brushing out my daughter's long, silky hair with giant razor-sharp claws, my dad heart was overflowing with pure, unadulterated satisfaction. As our heartwarming days unfolded side by side, the emotional bond between us deepened at lightning speed, turning every ordinary moment into a cherished family memory. Resting my colossal, mountain-sized head on my massive front claws, my glowing golden reptilian eyes blinked affectionately as I watched my little human splash around in the bubbling thermal waters. To my protective radioactive heart, she looked like the most breathtaking and precious work of art in the entire multiverse. Right in the middle of this peaceful moment, that familiar robotic chime cheerfully pinged inside my skull with a brand new main quest notification. The system announced that a proper childhood required interactive parent-child bonding through games, tasking me with making my daughter laugh out loud to unlock fantastic rewards. Blinking my golden eyes with that familiar, innocent cluelessness, I tried searching my sparse monster memories for any concept of childhood pastimes. The only thing I could remotely recall was playing piggyback rides with my own parental figures, but my razor-sharp scales and gigantic bulk would definitely turn that into a health hazard. Since guessing was getting me nowhere, I decided to bypass the mental gymnastics and simply ask the toddler directly what kind of game she wanted to play. Transmitting my thoughts gently into her mind, I asked what game she fancied so Daddy could join in on the fun. Sticking her wet little head out of the warm water and shaking her glossy dark hair to send droplets flying everywhere, the reincarnated Empress flashed a clever grin. Being a supreme martial monarch in her past life meant her dictionary had 0 entries for childhood games, but she had certainly read enough ancient folklore to know how human children played. A cunning little plot instantly bloomed in her brilliant mind, prompting her to look up with wide, innocent eyes and suggest a classic game of hide-and-seek. I eagerly agreed with a tail-wagging enthusiasm that shook the surrounding earth for miles, completely unaware that her royal motives went far beyond innocent amusement. During our recent travels through the Forbidden Zone, her sharp senses had locked onto a faint, deeply familiar spiritual signature emanating from a hidden cavern nearby. That specific energy belonged to a treacherous general from her past life who had brutally stabbed her in the back during her final downfall, a coward she thought had long since perished in the ancient chaos. Finding him miraculously surviving and licking his wounds right here in our backyard felt like a blessing from the heavens, though her current toddler state lacked the raw magic to finish him off directly. That was precisely why she orchestrated this game, sweetly urging me to turn around, cover my eyes, and count to 100 while she went to hide. Happily booming out my agreement, I spun my colossal body around and lifted 2 mountain-sized claws to clumsily cover my face, though the gaps between my fingers were wide enough to steer a spaceship through. Opening my thunderous voice, I bellowed out numbers that echoed across the eastern sector, like rolling artillery fire, terrifying every wild beast within earshot. Seizing that noisy distraction, the little empress transformed into a silent streak of light, darting swiftly toward the hidden cave she had locked onto earlier. Slipping past the hidden protective barriers without triggering a single alarm, she slipped into the dim cavern where a pale middle-aged man in battered black armor sat cross-legged on a stone platform. The treacherous general was deep in critical spiritual meditation, remaining completely oblivious to the legendary monarch standing quietly in the shadows. A chilling flash of murderous intent flickered across her eyes as she recognized the man who led the siege against her final fortress in the previous life. Since they were both stuck in reduced states, she quietly tucked herself into a dark corner to wait for the perfect moment while watching him sweat over his recovery. Back at the hot spring, I finished roaring out 100, dropped my massive paws with a cheerful grin, and declared that Daddy was coming to find her. Sweeping my god-tier sensory awareness across the entire eastern sector like an invisible tidal wave, I locked onto every tree, river, and cave within a 100-mile radius. Under the sweeping reach of my god-tier sensory awareness, absolutely nothing in the entire Forbidden Zone could hide from my glowing gaze. Spotting a heavily shielded cave hidden deep within the landscape, I instantly locked onto my little daughter, who was holding her breath and trying to squeeze herself into a tiny stone crevice right next to a meditating man. My simple reptilian brain processed the situation with absolute clarity. My daughter was successfully hidden, and my job was to find her, though that pesky mountain blocking my view was definitely in the way. Transmitting my thoughts directly into her mind, I cheerfully announced that I found her. The very next second, the world went completely dark for the little empress as a colossal paw blotted out the sky, though instead of attacking her, it wrapped securely around the entire mountain. The earth groaned in agonizing protest as I exerted an irresistible force, literally ripping the entire mountain peak and the hidden cave right out of the ground. Sunlight flooded the interior, instantly exposing 2 utterly dumbfounded faces of vastly different sizes huddled inside the ruined grotto. Holding the towering chunk of earth in my giant paw like a freshly plucked carrot, I lowered my massive head to bring the peak right to eye level, peering at the tiny head popping out of the rock crevice with triumphant pride as I declared that I won the game. Meanwhile, the bruised and battered Marshal General Liba stood frozen in absolute horror, staring up at a face larger than the heavens and glowing golden eyes that burned like twin suns. His brain completely short-circuited as he desperately questioned reality, wondering who he was, where he was, and what kind of cosmic catastrophe had just unfolded. Having spent his entire life as a powerful commander with peak divine fire cultivation and millions of loyal troops, he had carried his arrogant pride even into this desolate Forbidden Zone while plotting his grand comeback. Yet all of that fierce ambition shattered into dust when he watched a monstrous entity casually uproot a mountain just to play a game of hide-and-seek with a toddler. Shifting his paralyzed gaze from the giant monster to the tiny, doll-like girl sitting atop the floating peak, his pupils violently dilated as a terrifying realization crashed over his soul. Even in her current youthful disguise, that unmistakable, soul-deep imperial majesty and peerless aura belonged to none other than the legendary Supreme Empress Gu Jiaoshu, whom he had assumed perished in the ancient betrayal. Panic instantly warred with wild, untamed greed inside his chest, convincing him that capturing this helpless reincarnated monarch would hand him the ultimate secrets and treasures to reclaim his lost empire. Driven completely mad by avarice, he foolishly dismissed my towering form as a mindless beast serving as her glorified guardian, deciding that striking first was his only path to victory. Roaring with sudden malice, he forced his fractured spiritual core to ignite, abandoning his healing process to hurl his prized soul-capturing dragon skin net directly toward the little girl. A massive, shadowy spiritual dart simultaneously lunged toward my massive skull in a vain attempt to stun my supposed beastly intelligence, leaving the tiny empress completely calm as she watched the unfolding betrayal with icy disdain. Knowing full well that an angry radioactive father would handle the trash for her, she simply waited for the inevitable explosion of parental fury, while I was still happily basking in the pure joy of winning our little game. As I stood there eagerly waiting for my precious daughter to shower me with compliments for winning our game, that pesky little fly hiding in the cave not only refused to admit defeat, but actually had the audacity to attack my kid and insult me as a mere beast. That insolent display immediately triggered an absolute meltdown inside the nuclear biological reactor, humming deep within my chest, unleashing a suffocating wave of terrifying aura that made the entire sky tremble. Bypassing my signature atomic breath entirely, since wasting high-yield energy on a microscopic nuisance was completely unnecessary, I casually flicked my mountain-sized, scale-armored tail backward, like an ordinary person swatting away an annoying mosquito. The very microsecond that colossal tail swept through the air, space itself seemed to compress like a fragile sheet of paper, perfectly freezing the twisted, power-drunk expression of General Li Ba forever. Without even a split second to register pure terror, the proud martial commander and his legendary soul-capturing net were instantly annihilated into subatomic dust by the sheer, unimaginable force of the impact, leaving behind zero trace of his existence as a gentle breeze swept through the shattered cavern, dropping the massive mountain chunk and casually giving my tail a light flick to dust off the residue. My raging fury vanished instantly the moment I glanced back quarter down at my unharmed daughter, transforming me right back into a goofy, affectionate dad, waiting to share his victory. Transmitting my cheerful thoughts directly into her mind, I proudly announced that Daddy had squashed the bad bug and asked if she wanted to keep playing our game. Staring up at the spot where the man she once hated with every fiber of her being had just been erased from reality without requiring a single drop of her own sweat or intricate scheming, an overwhelming wave of absurd yet intoxicating satisfaction washed over her soul. Realizing that revenge could be this wonderfully simple and effortless, she flashed a dazzling, completely genuine smile and clapped her tiny hands together, praising Dad for being amazing, while declaring that hide and seek was boring and proposing a game of tag for tomorrow instead. Slipping quietly back into her mental spiritual sea, she added a fresh entry into her golden diary, noting that playing hide and seek with Dad was surprisingly fun and that erasing enemies felt even better than she had ever imagined, deciding that the grand game had only just begun. Meanwhile, that entire jaw-dropping execution had been broadcast in real time to every single regional overlord hiding across the Forbidden Zone, leaving the giant demon ape terrified into a state of near cardiac arrest, while the trembling dragon spirits stared in absolute awe. Deep in the floral valleys and dark forests, the other apex beasts frantically buried their heads in the dirt, finally grasping that our terrifying new overlord played by entirely different rules, showing brutal zero tolerance for outsiders while showering unconditional affection on his adopted toddler. Realizing that sheer survival depended entirely on keeping the little princess grinning from ear to ear, the cunning demon ape instantly snapped out of his trance, recognizing that smart minions didn't just stand around fanning leaves, they had to actively hustle for supreme favor. Realizing that simply standing around and fanning leaves with a giant branch was a dead-end job with zero future-proofing, the hulking demon ape knew he had to step up his corporate hustle. Firing up his telepathic energy across the spiritual network, he aggressively pinged the dragon's soul leader and the flower queen, demanding an emergency mastermind session right this second. The confused, spectral dragon and the buried flower queen initially hesitated, but the sheer, life-or-death urgency in the ape's mental broadcast made them instantly understand the gravity of the situation. Within seconds, three ancient apex predators who used to spend their centuries trying to violently murder each other were suddenly linked together in a cozy, highly cooperative telepathic conference call. The core agenda of this clandestine summit was crystal clear: figure out how to provide five-star hospitality to the little princess, secure the terrifying radioactive overlord's eternal favor, and carve out a safe survival path in the brand new Forbidden Zone hierarchy. Clearing his mental throat like a seasoned corporate executive, the demon ape took the floor first, with a deeply solemn expression. He reminded them of how the terrifying radioactive daddy operated entirely based on his daughter's mood, meaning a smile brought peaceful sunshine while a single frown could trigger an extinction-level catastrophe. They could no longer afford to operate as isolated, selfish warlords. They had to unite their forces, pool their resources, and proactively solve the princess's problems before she even knew she had them. The golden dragon's soul chimed in with an authoritative, highly supportive mental wave, agreeing that the plan was solid. He pointed out that their ghostly dragon legion had grown strong, and their spiritual forms had solidified enough to serve as a dazzling royal honor guard, capable of providing short-range spiritual flight transport whenever the little princess wanted to go outside. The flower queen shyly popped into the conversation next, offering a steady, daily supply of pure, organic flower nectar packed straight from her deepest bulbs to serve as a natural, preservative-free royal snack that would soothe the soul and nourish the spirit. While the demon ape approved of their contributions, he argued that it still wasn't enough because those were merely baseline duties, and true survival required aggressive innovation and forward-thinking customer service. They needed to anticipate the kids' unspoken desires and create new demands rather than just waiting to fulfill them, proving that the giant ape clearly possessed the strategic mind of an ambitious warlord. Since the little human toddler would naturally crave novel entertainment from the outside world, and their restrictive territorial boundaries trapped them inside the Forbidden Zone, they faced a massive supply chain bottleneck. Just as a heavy, awkward silence fell over the telepathic meeting, a timid, intensely flattering little voice squeezed its way into the channel. It belonged to the three-headed vulture king, the same miserable bird who had previously lost his sacred fruit to my jaws and spent his days trembling in dark corners. The demon ape initially considered swatting the pesky bird out of the psychic network, but logic prevailed since extra manpower was always welcome in a high-stakes startup. Demanding that the bird spit out his idea immediately, the Vulture King practically wept with joy and eagerly pitched his unique value proposition. He pointed out that while the great overlords were restricted by local boundary laws, his wing biology allowed him to slip past the perimeter and execute swift cross-border supply runs to nearby human sects. He was fast, possessed eagle-eyed vision, and was practically born to handle high-risk retail procurement operations. That brilliant pitch hit the telepathic room like a bolt of lightning, completely shattering the group's mental block and making the demon ape metaphorically slap his furry thigh. Assigning roles instantly, the elite internal service startup was officially incorporated with zero paperwork. The demon ape claimed the title of General Commander and Chief Security Officer. The Dragon Legion locked down the Royal Escort and Transport Division. The Flower Queen took over logistics and organic refreshments, and the Vulture King became their sole external procurement agent. Bundling all their collective destinies directly into the tiny hands of a sleeping toddler, they solemnly vowed to work together with absolute dedication, sweating blood and tears for the sake of staying alive. Thus, while my daughter and I remain completely clueless, the single most competitive, overachieving service squad in the history of the Chaotic Realms was born. Eager to prove his worth on day one, the Vulture King sneaked past the mist-shrouded boundaries, using his stealth tactics and successfully burglarized the high-security treasury of a prominent human sect called the Green Shadow Pavilion. He proudly scooped up their prized, generational heirloom, an exquisite music box, handcrafted from sonic stones designed to automatically play soothing lullabies, and flew back like an over-caffeinated courier. Dropping the shiny gadget right in front of the little Empress like a devoted dog presenting a prized bone, he waited for her royal review, only to watch her freeze in utter bewilderment as she stared back and forth between the chiming toy and the pathetic bird. With all three of its feathered heads plastered in eager expressions practically screaming for praise, the little Empress sank into a deep moment of silent contemplation, as she wondered if the universe had somehow broken its fundamental rules. Gripping the chiming box from the elite human pavilion, the brilliant wheels of her supreme royal intellect spun at lightning speed, instantly grasping the true nature of this surreal cosmic shift. It was abundantly clear that my sheer, world-ending power, combined with my absurdly unconditional pampering, had fundamentally cracked the psychological armor of these once proud Forbidden Zone overlords. Instead of being forced into passive obedience, they had independently pivoted into proactive sycophants, desperately brainstorming new ways to curry favor with the household's true decision-maker. And this pathetic three-headed bird was simply the pioneer of corporate bootlicking. A wonderfully bold and mischievous plan instantly bloomed in her brilliant mind, making her realize that utilizing their desperate loyalty could make her upcoming global conquest significantly more entertaining. Flashing a sweet, innocent smile that made the vulture's feathers flutter with pure ecstasy, she gently thanked the bird for the lovely gift, happily accepting the title of uncle while the demon ape watched in seething, jealous fury. Realizing her grand performance had hit all the right notes, she calmly waited for the next act while I clumsily combed through her long, silky hair with giant razor-sharp claws after another relaxing bath in the thermal springs. Staring down at her watery reflection and the simple vine carelessly tying her locks together, she let out a soft, deliberate sigh, loud enough for both me and my invisible army of spying servants to catch. Murmuring to herself that long hair was far too exhausting to manage without a gorgeous decorative hairpin, she planted the seed and instantly triggered an absolute stampede across the entire monster hierarchy. The demon ape's brain raced with panicked excitement at the sudden opportunity to shine, while the spectral dragon legion frantically debated where to source the finest imperial regalia across ancient vaults. Sensing the collective panic of my overachieving underlings, the system simultaneously dinged in my skull with a shiny new side quest, demanding a one-of-a-kind hairpin worthy of her peerless beauty. While the quest sounded simple enough, looking down at my house-sized claws made me realize that trying to carve a delicate ornament would be like asking a runaway freight train to stitch a lace handkerchief. Trusting my management instincts, I smoothly outsourced the entire operation to my panicking minions by broadcasting a blunt telepathic decree, ordering them to find the most breathtaking hairpin in existence for my daughter with the promise of a glorious reward. That single command hit the elite service squad like a tactical nuke, instantly sparking a cutthroat, no-holds-barred scavenger hunt across the mortal realm that would soon give neighboring human sects absolute nightmares. Deep in the dead of night at the prestigious Heavenly Sword sect, a senior elder violently coughed up blood during his meditation and sprinted to the central courtyard, only to discover their sacred 3,000-year-old ancestral blade missing and replaced by a single, coarse golden monkey hair embedded in the solid stone wall. The senior elder of the Heavenly Sword sect roared in absolute fury, questioning if the mortal world had collectively lost its mind as he stared at the bare wall where their 3,000-year-old ancestral blade once hung, marked only by a coarse golden monkey hair. Across the Western Territories, the master of the Herb Valley wept bitterly over the sudden disappearance of his legendary 9-leaf twilight grass, finding nothing left in the overturned dirt except a few unidentifiable purple flower petals. Down in the blazing spirit caverns, a master artisan stared blankly at an empty furnace where his prized, soul-piercing fire needle had vanished, leaving behind whispers of a massive shadowy vulture fleeing into the night. Entire regional sects panicked under the belief that an untouchable syndicate of demonic thieves was systematically gutting their treasuries, though none of them could find a single shred of evidence. 3 days later, by the edge of the steaming Forbidden Zone spring, the overachieving squad of monster overlords gathered to present their looted treasures like eccentric merchants. The demon ape proudly hoisted the colossal heavenly sword Sex Sword, suggesting it could double as a heavy-duty hairpin capable of double-duty defense. The Flower Queen awkwardly dragged forward the pulsing fairy grass with roots still attached, while the Vulture King proudly spat out the glowing fire needle with a smug grin. Before their bickering could escalate, the spectral dragon leader majestically drifted forward from the void, dragging out a breathtaking divine hairpin forged from ancient dragon bone and tipped with an ever-burning phoenix feather. The legendary phoenix soul golden hairpin radiated pure celestial majesty, carrying the immortal residue of an ancient phoenix goddess capable of purging inner demons and shielding the spirit realm. The moment that masterpiece appeared, the demon ape quietly hid his giant sword, the Flower Queen buried her grass, and the vulture nervously scraped his claws against the dirt, knowing they had been utterly outclassed. Catching the gleaming hairpin with a look of profound satisfaction, the little empress slid it gracefully into her dark locks, immediately feeling a wave of pure, revitalizing warmth soothe her exhausted spiritual sea. The exact microsecond the divine accessory settled into her hair, the system erupted in my skull with a triumphant fanfare, announcing a flawless S-tier completion across all main and side quests. The massive reward dropped straight into my inventory, a mythical tier dimensional pocket capable of altering its size, internal time flow, and appearance at will while granting absolute physical and energetic immunity against all cosmic detection. The system's cheerful description highlighted that carrying your beloved daughter safely against your chest was the ultimate romantic milestone for any elite dad, turning her into the coziest, sweetest little pendant ever. Reading through the game-changing specs, my giant golden eyes lit up with uncontainable joy, because this solved my absolute biggest parental anxiety in one fell swoop. With my tiny human safely tucked against my chest in the divine dimensional pocket, an overwhelming wave of absolute peace and golden satisfaction washed over my radioactive soul. For the first time since waking up in this chaotic wilderness, the nagging, nerve-wracking anxiety of accidentally squishing my delicate little princess or letting her slip from my massive claws vanished completely. Staring down at the sleek, matte black pouch seamlessly integrated into my dark, scale-armored chest, I felt like the most brilliantly engineered parent in the multiverse. My colossal body felt light, agile, and practically vibrating with an eager, protective energy that had been bottled up for far too long. Hanging out in one spot for days on end had left my titanic bones feeling stiff, and my tail was practically itching to carve through the landscape. A proper stroll was long overdue, and what better way to break in my brand new, premium dad gear than taking my favorite little passenger out on a grand tour of the wild. Gently rumbling a cheerful thought into the spatial link connecting us, I warned her to hold on tight as I began to shift my immense weight forward. The ground trembled with a rhythmic, thunderous cadence as my powerful hind legs pushed off the scorched earth, sending shockwaves rippling across the eastern sector of the Forbidden Zone. The local wildlife, ranging from massive shadow wolves to trembling territorial beasts, instantly scattered like frightened ants the moment my shadow fell across the tree line, terrified of crossing paths with the apex predator. Inside the luxurious, hyperdense spatial lounge of the dimensional pocket, the little empress sat comfortably on the plush, carpeted floor, while staring up at the massive, crystal-clear holographic viewing screen floating before her. Through that panoramic display, she watched the majestic primeval forest whip by in a breathtaking 360-degree spectacle, all captured from my soaring, godlike vantage point high above the canopy. It felt less like being carried inside a monster's pocket and more like riding in the cockpit of an invincible, cosmic warship piloted by a terrifying, scale-armored chauffeur. The sheer density of the spiritual energy swirling inside the pocket began to work its magic on her recovering constitution, wrapping her youthful meridians in a warm, nourishing cocoon that made her cultivation speeds surge effortlessly. Sipping on the peace of mind that came from absolute invulnerability, a rare, genuine smile touched the corners of her lips as she realized that her grand revenge strategy was operating under the safest, most unfair advantage imaginable. Striding forward with my head held high and my chest puffed out with infinite parental pride, I plowed through ancient mountain passes and dense jungle thickets, ready to show my daughter every magnificent corner of our domain, while proving to the entire world that being a pocket-carrying dad was the absolute pinnacle of overpowered existence. To stretch his stiff limbs and shake off the rust, the titanic entity hoisted his mountain-sized body upright, casting a sprawling, eclipsing shadow over the scorched earth. With a thunderous boom that shook the ground for 100 miles in every direction, he took his very first step, throwing the newly pacified denizens of the Forbidden Zone into a fresh panic as they wondered what catastrophic agenda the Supreme Overlord was hatching this time. Behind him, the colossal demon ape and the legion of spectral dragons instantly snapped into high alert, frantically forming a chaotic, overly zealous royal escort detail to trail in his wake. Thus began the pocket-carrying dad's very first official stroll through the realm. Wandering aimlessly across mountains and rivers, he soon stepped out of his personal domain and crossed over into the chaotic western sector of the Forbidden Zone, a toxic wasteland smothered in vibrant, iridescent miasma where even the air itself could corrode iron. This was the undisputed territory of the myriad-poisoned Scorpion Emperor, a terrifying arachnid beast stretching over 1,000 meters long, with a crystalline purple carapace and a tail forged from condensed venom, having spent more than 150,000 years cultivating his dark arts. Under normal circumstances, any living soul daring to set foot in his domain would be instantly melted into a puddle of foul pus by the apex predator's signature neurotoxin. But the microsecond he sensed the radioactive, soul-shredding aura pressing down from the sky, his century-old arrogance vanished into thin air, and the giant scorpion collapsed flat against the dirt, burying his massive head deep into the mud without daring to draw a single breath. I didn't even spare the giant bug a passing glance. My attention was completely hijacked by a gorgeous, rainbow-colored crystal cluster jutting out of a nearby rock face. Staring at the shimmering, candy-like mineral, I figured it looked delicious enough to make a wonderful little rainbow treat for my daughter, so I casually snapped off a massive chunk with my claw. Little did I know, that sparkling rock was actually the myriad-poisoned Scorpion Emperor's core essence crystal, a concentrated blob of world-destroying poison refined from 10 years of his cultivation, where a single microscopic speck could wipe out an entire civilization. Inside the dimensional pocket, the little Empress watched the scene unfold on the panoramic screen and nearly lost her color, knowing full well that while her constitution was hardy, she had zero desire to snack on biohazard material. Quickly pinging my mind with a panicked warning that the colorful rock was poisonous, I paused, gave the pretty crystal a curious sniff, and immediately registered the harsh, chemical sting on my simple taste buds. Deciding it was just an expired snack, I tossed the lethal world-ending essence aside with the careless disdain one might use to flick away a piece of trash. Terrified out of his wits, the prostrate Scorpion Emperor assumed the great overlord was deeply displeased with his tribute, a terrifying misunderstanding that could cost him his life. Desperate to appease me, he frantically dug his claws into his deepest nest and dragged out a sacred, moonlight-bathed herb that radiated pure, saintly energy capable of neutralizing all poisons in existence, offering it up as a peace offering. Sniffing the fragrant little herb and deciding it smelled quite pleasant, I pocketed it graciously, leaving the Scorpion Emperor to heave a massive sigh of relief, as if he had just crawled back from the gates of hell. And so, I continued my casual stroll with my daughter safely tucked against my chest, sweeping across both the eastern and western sectors of the Forbidden Zone. Wherever we walked, every ancient monster overlord from the slumbering nine-headed serpent kings to the swamp-dwelling heaven-devouring toads bolted awake in sheer terror, instantly dropping to their knees to pledge absolute allegiance while frantically coughing up their rarest, most treasured heirlooms as tribute. There were enlightenment-boosting lotus seeds, 10,000-year-old stalactite milk for forging indestructible flesh, and all sorts of sparkling, gorgeous gemstones. While I didn't think much of it beyond appreciating a productive walk that netted some decent snacks and toys for my kid, from the perspective of the little Empress inside the dimensional pocket, this wasn't a casual stroll at all. It was a breathtaking, grandiose military inspection. Using the most absolute, unapologetic display of dominance, her dad was asserting total ownership over the entire Forbidden Zone, cementing her status as the singular, undisputed princess of this chaotic world. Taking in the panoramic vistas of both the eastern and western sectors through the dimensional pocket, the little Empress silently cataloged every strategic terrain marker and monster overlord lair, marking them as the foundational capital for her future vengeance and global conquest. Just as I was leisurely strolling back toward our sacred mountain home, her gaze was suddenly snagged by a solitary, pitch-black peak looming near the edge of the Forbidden Zone, a barren wasteland of dead rock topped with a massive, rusted, broken sword blade that radiated a bone-chilling murderous intent. Instantly recognizing the signature seal of the Myriad Sword Immortal sect, one of the 4 treacherous factions that had betrayed her in her past life, her eyes turned as cold as ice. That very sword was left behind by an ancient sect ancestor who had failed his ascension and used his divine blade to suppress an ancient, world-wrecking demon. But to her, it was a reeking monument of hypocrisy and bloody betrayal. Seething with an intense, calculated malice, a brilliant and ruthless plan took shape in her mind. Gently tugging at the inner lining of the pocket with her tiny hand, she pitched her voice into a soft, aggrieved whimper through our mental link, complaining that the ugly, blackened mountain with its ugly broken sword made her deeply unhappy. In my simple parental logic, my daughter's unhappiness was an extinction-level crisis that demanded immediate correction, so I instantly perked up and assured her that Daddy would redecorate the place right away. Striding over to the gloomy peak with a few heavy steps, I surveyed the dreary rock and agreed that it was an absolute eyesore devoid of a single speck of vibrant green. Glancing over at a nearby, lush mountain miles away, teeming with vibrant, 1,000-year-old trees and rolling streams, I executed a move that nearly gave the watching monster overlords collective heart attacks. Digging my massive claws deep into the base of the verdant, tree-covered mountain, I strained my core and violently ripped the entire towering mass right out of the earth like a massive carrot. Slinging the living, green-capped peak over my shoulder, I marched back to the ugly black hill and slammed it straight down on top of it with the casual precision of a farmer transplanting rice seedlings. The apocalyptic impact instantly obliterated the ancient rusted sword blade into twisted scrap metal, while deep underground, the awakened primordial demon, who had barely begun to celebrate the loosening of its seals, was smashed flat beneath an even heavier, life-force-choking mountain of earth and trees, driving it back into a miserable, silent slumber with a muffled shriek. Far across the boundless realms in the central continent's grand immortal hall, the golden ancestral soul tablet of that legendary ascender cracked right down the middle in front of the horrified elders, though the cataclysmic tremor remained entirely unnoticed by the wider, distant cultivation world. The blazing arrogance of the arrogant Sun Yang divine sect, renowned across the mortal realm for mastering the scorching solar true fire, finally drove them headfirst toward their own annihilation. On this fateful day, Zhao Haodian, the deeply pampered grandson of the reigning sect master, led an elite retinue of enforcers to the outer edges of the chaotic Forbidden Zone in search of glory. Under the guise of a righteous trial, their true intent was pillaging and bullying weaker territories, using their sect's formidable prestige. Luck seemed to favor them when they stumbled upon a legendary dragon blood vermilion fruit, growing deep in the wild, a peerless divine treasure that flowered for 3,000 years, fruited for 3,000 years, and took another 3,000 years to ripen, condensing a drop of pure, ancient dragon blood powerful enough to make true mortals salivate. Protecting this prime fruit tree was a young vulture, the newly adult son of our very own three-headed vulture king, stationed there strictly to guard the future royal snack. When Zhao Haoshan's crew spotted the glowing, fragrant fruit, greed instantly consumed their eyes, dismissing the lone guardian beast as a worthless pest. Barking out a cold order of execution, one of the elite guards flicked his wrist to launch a razor-sharp flying blade wreathed in roaring flames, cleanly severing the young vulture's wing and sending it crashing into the dirt in a geyser of boiling blood. Laughing arrogantly as he plucked the divine fruit for himself, Zhao Haotian strutted away without a backward glance, leaving the mutilated bird to drag its shattered, bleeding body back toward the Forbidden Zone in an agonizing crawl for survival. When the three-headed vulture king found his beloved son, bleeding out with a severed wing, the 6 eyes across his 3 heads turned a violent, murderous crimson, unleashing a tidal wave of demonic fury that threatened to rip the skies apart. Discovering that the perpetrators belonged to the tyrannical Sun Yang divine sect nearly made him charge out blindly for vengeance, but sheer survival instinct stopped him in his tracks, forcing him to haul his wounded son straight to the demon ape and the dragon spirit legion to lodge a formal, weeping grievance. The moment the monster overlords heard the outrage, their collective blood boiled, not just because a comrade's child was mutilated, but because that stolen dragon blood vermilion fruit was supposed to be part of their next tribute package for the little princess. Stealing from the domain was bad enough, but stealing from the little empress was a capital crime that directly challenged the supreme majesty of our household. Leading an imposing delegation with the demon ape at the helm, a sky-darkening honor guard of spectral dragons, and the grieving vulture king clutching his bleeding son, the furious mob marched straight to where I was relaxing by the thermal springs. At that exact moment, I was happily lounging in the sun while chatting with my daughter inside my dimensional pocket, enthusiastically narrating an epic tale of a giant red warrior named Ultima fighting a monster named Golza. Just as I was getting to the best part where the giant hero punches the beast into next week, the towering group of angry underlings swarmed around me, radiating enough grievance to freeze the water. Annoyed that someone dared interrupt our cozy story time, I projected a lazy query asking what on earth they wanted. Terrified to speak directly of stolen fruit, the demon ape frantically pointed a massive, trembling finger down at the one-winged, half-dead young vulture, adopting an aggrieved and furious tone as he begged me to dispense ultimate justice against the wicked intruders who had dared to cross our borders. Looking down at the battered, half-dead little vulture whimpering on the ground, I instantly recognized him as the offspring of our newly recruited avian delivery agent, the very bird that had brought us that chiming music box. Seeing my own employee's kid brutally mutilated for simply doing his job triggered a silent, boiling fury deep within my biological reactor. Bullying my staff was a direct insult to my personal authority. Refusing to act without consulting my household's true decision-maker, I mentally checked in with my daughter inside the dimensional pocket to ask how she thought we should handle the situation. Hearing the name of the Sun Yang divine sect, the very faction responsible for one of her deepest past life betrayals, a spine-chilling flash of murderous ice locked deep in her eyes, though her external expression instantly shifted into pure, innocent righteousness. Transmitting her thoughts with a sweet, musical tone, she reminded me of the Ultraman story I had just told her, pointing out that simply chasing the monsters away wasn't enough because their home base was still standing. With innocent logic that cut straight to the core of the problem, she suggested that Daddy needed to go smash their base to pieces so they would never come out to bully anyone ever again. My simple reptilian brain instantly lit up with total enlightenment, marveling at how brilliantly my daughter's logic hit the nail on the head, as I agreed that we needed to uproot the villain's nest once and for all. While I prepared to casually flatten an entire immortal sect like a cardboard delivery box, the little empress wore a deeply satisfied grin inside her private pocket fortress, knowing her intricate revenge plot was executing to absolute perfection. Meanwhile, the gathered crowd of monster overlords erupted into a frenzy of zealous excitement upon hearing that the Supreme Overlord was personally marching out to obliterate the Sun Yang divine sect. The demon ape's chest thudded with militant pride, and the weeping vulture king nearly bowed in tearful gratitude, viewing his son's bloody wing as a sacred catalyst that had summoned the wrath of God. The entire legion roared their approval until the sky itself trembled, eager to watch the offending mortals turn into cosmic ash. Rising to my full, mountain-crushing height and casting an eclipsing shadow over the entire landscape, I radiated a suffocating wave of primordial pressure before realizing a rather embarrassing logistical flaw in my grand crusade. Turning my golden eyes toward the cheering demon ape, I asked the most crucial question of all. Exactly where on Earth was the bad guy's base located? Having spent my entire post-awakening existence lounging around home, my internal compass was entirely useless for navigating the vast outside mortal realms. The demon ape's triumphant roar choked off instantly as his furry jaw dropped in sudden realization, though before he could panic, the three-headed vulture king lunged forward with a furious hiss, eager to serve as our absolute GPS and guide us straight to the enemy's doorstep. Across the endless golden deserts of the Western Buddhist lands, ancient monks who had spent millennia achieving spiritual tranquility suddenly snapped out of their deep meditative trances with ragged gasps of horror. The sacred golden bells hanging from the eaves of every temple began to ring wildly of their own accord, chiming an unbroken, frantic dirge of impending doom as the very fabric of heaven and earth shuddered beneath an unseen, terrifying weight. Monks and abbots alike tumbled out of their meditation halls, falling to their knees with pale faces and trembling hands as they stared toward the eastern horizon, muttering frantic prayers to ward off the catastrophic karma descending upon the mortal realm. Far across the oceans in the misty southern seas, colossal leviathans that usually slept beneath the crushing pressure of the deep trenches breached the surface in a synchronized panic, thrashing the stormy waters into boiling foam as they fled toward the farthest abysses. In the northern frozen wastes, ancient ice spirits curled inward and buried themselves deep beneath miles of glacial ice, desperately trying to shield their spiritual signatures from the absolute, world-shredding majesty rolling across the continents. The entire cultivation world, from proud, immortal sects and ancient dynasties to secluded hermits and terrifying wild beasts, was instantly paralyzed in a state of frozen, breathless terror. Every living cultivator with a shred of spiritual awareness understood one undeniable, horrifying truth. The absolute master of the Forbidden Zone, the primordial entity that had slumbered in untouchable mystery for ages, had finally stepped out across the threshold and crossed into the outside world. And leading the vanguard of this apocalyptic march was the three-headed Vulture King. With his three sets of eyes burning with a fierce, revenge-fueled determination, and his newly regenerated spiritual aura blazing like a black beacon, he soared high through the upper atmosphere. His sharp, eagle-like gaze pierced effortlessly through the rolling clouds and spatial barriers, locking onto a distinct, residual trail of scorching solar true fire and a foul, arrogant bloodline signature that stretched far away toward the distant territories of the arrogant Sun Yang divine sect. Right behind him, the demon ape marched with heavy, rhythmic footfalls that caused minor earthquakes with every stride, his bulging muscles radiating a militant zeal as he coordinated the sweeping formations of the royal escort. Above them, a magnificent legion of thousands of spectral dragons wound through the heavens like a river of glowing starlight, their low, resonant dragon roars harmonizing into a majestic battle hymn that shook the very stars in the firmament. And in the very center of this grand, terrifying procession strode I. My massive, mountain-sized, reptilian body dwarfed the towering trees and jagged peaks below us, each step carrying me effortlessly across hundreds of leagues of territory as space itself warped and compressed beneath my colossal weight. Yet, despite the earth-shattering commotion of our advance, my primary focus remained completely locked on the tiny, snug sanctuary resting right against the center of my chest. Inside the divine dimensional pocket, the little Empress lounged in supreme comfort on the plush, warm carpeting, watching the entire unfolding spectacle through the crystal-clear panoramic holographic display. The screen projected our forward movement from my godlike, overhead perspective, showing rivers, mountain ranges, and soaring cloud decks rushing backward beneath us at dizzying speeds. The rich, intoxicating spiritual energy swirling inside her mobile sanctuary wrapped around her, developing meridians like a soothing cocoon, silently polishing her cultivation foundation and sharpening her mind to a razor-sharp edge. Staring at the screen, she watched as countless regional lords, ancient beasts, and hidden cultivators instinctively flattened themselves against the dirt the moment our shadow swept over them, trembling so violently they didn't even dare to raise their heads. A deep, intoxicating sense of vindication blossomed within her chest. In her past life, she had fought tooth and nail, bleeding and scheming for centuries just to earn a fraction of the respect these mortals now showed by simply groveling in our path. And now, the terrifying apex predator who held the entire cosmos in the palm of his clawed hand was personally marching across the world to flatten her ancient enemies, all because she casually mentioned that an ugly mountain or a rude bully had made her unhappy. A soft, knowing smile curved the corners of her lips as she gently touched the divine phoenix hairpin resting in her dark hair, feeling its warm, protective energy pulse against her soul. Her grand revenge was no longer a distant, agonizing dream that required years of cautious plotting. It was unfolding right now, executed with an overwhelming, unstoppable force that defied all reason and laws of heaven. Sensing her peaceful, contented mood through our subtle telepathic link, My radioactive heart swelled with a warm, golden wave of paternal pride. My little princess was happy, her spirits were high, and the navigation vector was locked dead ahead. Adjusting my stride and letting out a low, satisfied rumble that vibrated through the very airwaves, I picked up our pace, carrying my most precious cargo straight toward the doorstep of the doomed Sun Yang divine sect. High atop the sacred peak of Mount Lingshan, within the majestic halls of the great Thunderclap Temple, an aged and haggard Buddha, whose face looked as though it were carved from withered wood, slowly raised a weathered mallet and struck the wooden fish before him. A single, melodious chime of resonance rippled across the entire Buddhist realm, causing countless monks who had been diligently chanting scriptures to freeze in their tracks and look up toward the summit with bewildered expressions. The ancient Buddha let out a deep, sorrowful sigh, his voice carrying the melancholic weight of ages past as he declared that a great tribulation was fast approaching and issued a strict decree. From this day forward, the entire mountain was sealed for 3,000 years, and all worldly karma and entanglements were henceforth severed from the Buddhist domain. His tone was steeped in a profound sense of helplessness and suffocating dread, for that descending aura was far too terrifying for them to ever contemplate resisting, leaving escapist seclusion as their sole remaining path to survival. Simultaneously, across the northern demonic abyss, the southern dragon palaces, and the countless ancient, unfathomable sacred dynasties scattered throughout the mainland. Legions of reclusive ancient monsters who had remained asleep for tens of thousands of years were jolted awake by that same sudden, soul-crushing pressure. Their reactions were terrifyingly uniform. Sheer horror, unadulterated panic, followed instantly by the issuance of draconian orders, forbidding any disciple or subordinate from approaching within 10,000 miles of the chaotic forbidden zone. The entire cultivation world felt as though an invisible, giant hand had violently slammed the pause button on existence, forcing every supreme faction to shrink back into the shadows. Though they remained entirely oblivious to the specific catalyst, every single expert knew with absolute certainty that a tempest capable of rewriting the world order had officially arrived. Yet, the primary instigator of this global cataclysm remained blissfully unaware of the chaos trailing in his wake. I continued my unhurried, leisurely stroll right behind the three-headed Vulture King, my titanic, mountain-sized physique shaking the earth and cracking the heavens with every single step. Mountain ranges and winding rivers felt like fragile sandcastle toys beneath my feet, and I didn't even need to exert any conscious malice. Simply letting my natural aura wash over the terrain as I passed was more than enough to force every living creature within tens of thousands of miles to collapse flat against the dirt in trembling terror. Any foolish, unaware beasts that dared stray too close were instantly reduced to fine mists of blood by the oppressive spiritual pressure radiating from the Dragon Escort Legion. Inside the luxury of the dimensional pocket, the little Empress watched the unfolding spectacle through her panoramic screen with wide, calculating eyes. She observed the groveling beast kings, the panic-stricken cultivators, and the wave of terrified spiritual divine senses sweeping in from distant horizons. This was the overwhelming, undisputed majesty of her beloved dad. A mere casual stroll out of his domain had instantly brought the entire world to its knees. The sheer psychological impact of this display felt infinitely more profound and awe-inspiring than even the peak days of her past life as a supreme reigning empress. Forming an unprompted thought through her mental link, she softly praised me for being amazingly powerful. Caught slightly off guard by the sudden compliment, I blinked in momentary confusion, wondering what grand achievement I had just accomplished besides taking a routine walk. Concluding that she must simply be overjoyed by the novelty of the shifting scenery outside, I responded with warm, indulgent affection, promising to take her to explore even more distant realms the moment we finished demolishing the bad guy's base. To my simple mind, this entire excursion was nothing more than a wholesome educational parent-child bonding activity. Meanwhile, pacing ahead of us as our dedicated scout, the three-headed Vulture King was experiencing an absolute ecstasy of fierce anticipation. He could physically feel the soul-shredding aura pressing down directly behind him, and he could see how the arrogant eastern apex predators were cowering like quails without daring to lift their heads. This was the pinnacle of riding coattails to absolute glory, the supreme honor of serving as the vanguard for the master of all creation. Spanning all three of his feathered heads wide and letting out a piercing, triumphant shriek that shook the firmament, he pushed himself to fly faster and harder. His singular, burning motivation was to guide his master straight to the doorstep of the Sun Yang divine sect as quickly as humanly possible, dying to witness the look of frozen despair wash over his hated enemies' faces. Deep in the heart of the central mainland, the sprawling sanctuary of the Sun Yang divine sect had been constructed directly atop an immense cluster of active volcanic calderas. Dozens of magnificent, crimson-red palaces were distributed harmoniously across the jagged peaks, permanently blanketed in a swirling fog of searing fire spirit energy that cast myriad rays of prismatic, auspicious light across the sky like an immortal deity's domain. Inside the towering sanctum of the central Sun Yang Palace, the reigning sect master, Zhao Wuji, sat in lofty dignity upon the sovereign throne. Possessing an imposing, majestic visage and draped in an imperial crimson-gold flame robe, he was surrounded by 9 illusory mini-suns, floating in perpetual orbit, projecting the peerless aura of a half-step divine king master. At that exact moment, he was gazing down with a warm, approving smile at his most deeply cherished grandson, Zhao Haodian, who had just returned triumphant from his expedition to the edges of the chaotic Forbidden Zone. Haoshin, excellent work, truly magnificent. Zhao Wuji's booming voice rang out like a bronze bell, dripping with exuberant praise. To step out of the sect gates and immediately secure an unearthly divine treasure like the dragon blood vermilion fruit for our lineage. You have rendered an extraordinary service today, my boy. Standing proudly in the center of the grand hall with his chest puffed out and a smug smirk plastered across his face, Zhao Haoshin offered a deeply arrogant, performative bow as he loudly declared, "Grandfather, I dare not claim full credit. This success is entirely due to the supreme prestige of our sacred sect and your divine, all-encompassing protection." Ha ha ha, splendid. Zhao Wuji threw his head back and laughed heartily, utterly enchanted by his grandson's polished blend of talent and flattering humility. A bright and boundless future awaits you. Just as he was opening his mouth to offer further words of encouragement, fully intending to bestow the precious dragon blood fruit directly to the youth to help him break through his current cultivation bottleneck, a sudden, violent anomaly shattered the tranquility of the hall. Before anyone could even process the existential irony of trying to block a walking world-ender with a few spicy rocks, a high-pitched, ear-splitting shriek sliced through the grand hall like a dentist's drill on a Monday morning, sending the entire Sun Yang divine sect into a violent, teeth-rattling convulsion that instantly transformed their peaceful sanctuary into a pinball machine. Right in the center of the chamber, the Heaven Fire Compass, a sacred artifact designed to monitor a 10,000-mile radius and usually about as exciting as a wet piece of cardboard, was suddenly spinning so fast it looked like it was trying to launch itself into orbit, prompting Sect Master Zhao Wuji's face to drop faster than a bad stock as an unfortunate elder came stumbling, tripping, and essentially face-planting through the doors, babbling about a system malfunction that sounded suspiciously like total annihilation. Before Zhao Wuji could even mutter a classic, "Well, that's not good," he teleported to the compass with the kind of frantic energy usually reserved for someone spotting a spider on their pillow, only to watch the emergency dial flash a blood-red alert so intense it looked like a discount horror movie, forcing him to thrust his divine sense outward to investigate, which immediately went about as well as bringing a wet paper towel to a hurricane, when an invisible, brick wall of pure malice straight up vaporized his mental probe and left him coughing up blood like he just swallowed a handful of tacks. Realizing that the shockwave alone was enough to smack around a half-step divine king, panic threatened to tap him on the shoulder, but with zero time to consult a therapist or wonder if this was karma for stealing dragon fruit, he slammed his fist down and bellowed orders to activate the sect's ultimate doomsday cheat code, the legendary Nine Heavens Blazing Sun Array, a dusty relic built by some overachieving ancient founder that required siphoning 9 subterranean fire dragon veins and cost roughly a century's worth of spiritual electricity per use. Yet none of the terrified elders dared question the price tag because the alternative was getting turned into cosmic dust. So with a chorus of desperate yes sirs, thousands of disciples scattered like roaches when the lights flickered on, triggering a subterranean rumble that made the entire volcanic cluster shake like a cheap massage chair, as 9 pillars of molten, retina-scorching magma rocketed into the sky to form a colossal, swirling vortex of pure death that instantly baked the clouds out of existence and threw a massive, glowing red dome over the whole compound, making it look from afar like a giant, angry neon sign that screamed, "Please vaporize me." While back on the ground, young Zhao Haotian quickly traded his brief moment of sheer existential dread for an obnoxious, cult-like grin of supreme confidence, firmly convinced that their glowing red snow globe was totally going to save them from whatever cosmic blender was currently rolling down the highway. Gazing up at the blazing, artificial star of the 9 Heavens Blazing Sun Array, with an expression that practically screamed, "I just figured out how to microwave a burrito without a plate," young Zhao Haoshin looked toward his grandfather, as if the old man had just single-handedly invented sliced bread, while Sectmaster Zhao Wuji stood proudly at the threshold of the Grand Hall, soaking in the oppressive, planet-baking energies of their ancient doomsday defense shield and convincing himself that no force in this or any other dimensional plane could possibly pierce a glowing red snow globe. This thoroughly over-engineered, unaware that their multi-trillion spirit stone asset was essentially functioning as a giant, neon-lit neon sign pointing directly to the universe's biggest target. The party continued in high gear as the 3-headed Vulture King pushed his feathered wings past their structural limits, locking his 3 sets of bloodshot eyes dead on the pulsing signal of Zhao Haotian's obnoxious aura, like a guided missile programmed entirely by pure, unadulterated petty spite. While the rest of the mortal world had officially designated our moving coordinates as an extinction-level radius and collectively slammed their doors shut with enough prayers to power a small continent, our casual family road trip was cruising along without a single care in the world, with my massive, mountain-shaking footsteps turning continental drift into a mild vibration, while my primary cognitive function remained entirely localized to carrying a very cozy, very quiet little passenger. Inside the luxury suite of the Dimensional Pocket, the little Empress watched the panoramic display project our approach toward the shimmering horizon, her sharp eyes, noting every panicked peasant and cowering minor sect master who happened to flatten themselves into the mud as our shadow crossed their zip codes, though her attention soon shifted toward the blazing chain of volcanic calderas rising in the distance, like a row of giant, angry pimples. Spotting the smoking mountain peaks through the glass, she offhandedly remarked that it was just a regular volcano zone, which instantly caused my simple, well-meaning reptilian brain to logically conclude that the Earth must be running a nasty 104-degree fever, a brilliant medical diagnosis that sent the trailing monster entourage into a synchronized existential crisis where the demon ape and the dragon ghosts began passionately debating whether my clinical observation meant a primordial fire demon was suffering from a terminal head cold, or if I was preparing to cure the planet's allergies with a single, highly judgmental paw swipe. Brushing aside my underlings' Olympic-level mental gymnastics over my passing musings on colored rivers and feverish dirt piles, I finally broke through the final mountain ridge and froze dead in my tracks, my giant golden eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated aesthetic delight as a colossal, retina-scorching orb of pure solar fire loomed across the horizon, casting a blinding red-gold glare across 10,000 miles of sky. It wasn't the apocalyptic thermal pressure or the legendary defensive majesty of the ancient grand array that caught my attention. No, to my simple, straightforward, easily amused parental mindset, the glowing dome looked precisely like a gigantic, ultra-luxurious, color-changing nightlight, prompting me to mentally exclaim that someone had accidentally left a remarkably large, very bright light bulb right out in the middle of nowhere, and that my daughter was definitely going to want one for her bedroom. In that beautifully simple, unburdened mind of mine, this glowing barrier was neither an ancient, planet-baking superformation, nor a terrifying divine defense grid designed to incinerate mortals. No, to a creature whose aesthetic scale ranged from shiny rock to really cool glow-in-the-dark toy, it looked precisely like a gigantic, ultra-bright, perfectly spherical nightlight, sparking the brilliant parental realization that if I simply plucked this magnificent, oversized light bulb right out of the sky and tucked it into our cave ceiling, my daughter would never have to stumble around in the dark again. Utterly thrilled by my own domestic ingenuity, I eagerly broadcasted the grand design into the dimensional pocket, asking if she liked the massive new lamp and offering to harvest it on the spot. Inside her secure sanctuary, the little Empress cast a glance up at the dazzling dome of the nine heavens blazing sun array, instantly recognizing it as a lethal, high-tier death trap capable of vaporizing half-step divine kings with its concentrated solar true fire. Yet the moment she heard her oversized, well-meaning dad casually refer to a multi-trillion spirit stone apocalyptic formation as a nice little nightlight, every ounce of tension instantly evaporated from her tiny frame, leaving her to silently pour one out for the Sun-Yang divine sect, while marveling at the sheer, unmitigated disrespect of treating a legendary doomsday barrier like an IKEA home decor item. Meanwhile, atop the primary peak of the sect master Zhao Wuji and his trembling legions of elders and disciples stood frozen like startled deer as the titanic shadow of my radioactive form completely swallowed the sky, blotting out the artificial sun and plunging their blazing paradise into an eerie, suffocating twilight. The moment Zhao Wuji laid eyes on my mountain-shattering, scale-armored physique in the cold, indifferent gaze of my giant golden eyes, his soul practically evacuated his body, recognizing the legendary, primordial terror of a true Taichu entity stepping straight out of ancient mythology. A crushing wave of icy regret slammed into his chest as he cursed his idiot grandson Zhao Haoqian for poking a cosmic hornet's nest over a glowing fruit, but before he could even muster a final breath of defiance, my colossal silhouette loomed directly over their supreme shield, my golden pupils locked entirely on the glowing red dome with the focused determination of a dad determined to win a giant stuffed animal at a carnival game. Glancing down at the shimmering, artificial sun with the casual curiosity of a toddler inspecting a slightly defective snow globe, I genuinely wondered how on earth one was supposed to unscrew the thing without accidentally scratching the paint, entirely oblivious to the fact that down below, Sect Master Zhao Wuji and his terrified congregation were currently experiencing a collective heart attack as our silent, mountain-sized shadow crushed their nerves into fine powder. Desperate to break the suffocating silence, Zhao Wuji cranked his spiritual amplification to maximum and bellowed out a groveling, desperate plea for mercy, offering literally any price to appease what he assumed was a supreme cosmic deity, though to my simple reptilian ears, his frantic shouting sounded remarkably like an annoying mosquito buzzing right beside my ear. Annoyed by the petty buzzing and feeling a bit too warm for comfort, I casually stretched out a massive, scale-armored claw and gave their legendary, planet-baking shield a tentative little poke, a completely innocuous gesture that the sun-worshipping cultists instantly misinterpreted as an ultimate, arrogant death sentence. Pushed over the edge by wounded pride and sheer existential panic, a hot-headed elder screamed that they wouldn't go down without a fight, prompting Zhao Wuji to completely abandon all reason and order every single disciple to dump their entire life savings of mana into the core of the nine heavens blazing sun array, to unleash a tidal wave of world-incinerating golden solar true fire that surged upward like a roaring, celestial tsunami to swallow my giant paw whole. For a breathless second, the entire planet held its breath as a terrifying, space-warping heat cooked the atmosphere, with Zhao Wuji and his delusional followers cheering as they watched the golden inferno completely engulf my limb, utterly convinced that even a primeval entity would get instantly roasted into barbecue scraps. Yet, 3 agonizing seconds later, as the roaring flames cleared to reveal my massive, pitch-black claw completely unscathed, without so much as a single, singed scale or a speck of soot to show for it. The smug celebratory grins on the entire sect's faces froze dead in place like cheap statues while I lazily blinked my giant golden eyes and wondered why the giant glowing lamp had just felt so surprisingly squishy. Lowering my massive gaze to inspect the tip of my own claw, I barely felt more than a pleasant, lukewarm tingle, roughly akin to resting a hand against a cozy radiator on a freezing winter morning. Though I instantly decided I didn't care for it one bit because, inside the dimensional pocket, the little Empress was playfully shielding her eyes with her tiny palms and grumbling that the artificial light was a bit too harsh. Oh, so the glowing lamp wants to play rough, does it? A flicker of mild annoyance sparked through my reptilian consciousness. Raising my mountain-sized head, I finally fixed my giant golden eyes downward and properly regarded the furiously blazing dome with the critical eye of a homeowner, deciding whether a particularly obnoxious porch light needed to be unscrewed or simply vaporized. In my unbothered worldview, their legendary solar true fire was nothing more than an overgrown campfire, and since campfire smoke was mildly annoying, it was time to clear the air. Under the terrified gaze of tens of thousands of Sun Yang divine sect disciples and the increasingly frantic, cold sweat-drenched expression of sect master Zhao Wuji, the colossal primordial entity floating in the upper atmosphere slowly parted jaws wide enough to swallow a mountain range whole. Deep within my throat, a point of intensely deep, midnight blue illumination flickered to life. What began as a tiny, unassuming pinprick of light expanded at an exponential, terrifying velocity, blazing brighter and more dazzling by the millisecond as a destructive energy reserve outscaling their pathetic solar flames by a factor of millions, coiled into a coiled spring of pure, reality-unmaking devastation. What in the name of the heavens is that? Zhao Wuji's pupils shriveled down to microscopic pinpricks. Staring into the swirling azure vortex, he was struck by an absolute, primordial terror rising from the deepest abysses of his soul, an instinctive realization that this was an extinction level, fundamental erasure, capable of reducing existence, spatial laws, and matter itself back into an absolute, blank slate of nothingness. Bad. Full power defense everyone, maximum defense right now, he shrieked in a voice completely torn apart by blind panic. But it was already light years too late. A low, bone-rattling vibration that sounded as though it were tearing through the foundational fabric of the primordial cosmos echoed across the continent. A blinding beam of pure, star-devouring azure light, an atomic breath forged from the raw heart of a nuclear reactor and channeled through divine biology, erupted violently from my jaws. The azure torrent sheared through the upper atmosphere, instantly turning every physical law, barrier, and spatial fold in its path into molecular dust. In a fraction of a millisecond, it collided dead-on with a roaring, mile-high tsunami of golden solar true fire. For one breathless heartbeat, the entire universe seemed to mute its audio and strip away its color, leaving behind only a stark, apocalyptic contrast between the blinding, arrogant gold of the human sex's ultimate magic and the abyssal, terrifying indigo of true, unfiltered destruction. The two apocalyptic forces locked horns in a clash that shook the tectonic plates of the entire central continent, visible to millions of horrified cultivators across a dozen empires. Yet, calling it a clash was a statistical insult. The contest lasted less than a single blink. The azure beam sliced through the golden firestorm like a red-hot tungsten rod, sliding effortlessly through a block of frozen butter. The legendary, indestructible solar true fire, boasting an ego that claimed it could melt gods and purify creation, shattered like fragile, sun-baked ice, instantly vaporizing, dissolving, and blinking out of existence under the raw thermal and kinetic superiority of the atomic breath. No! Zhao Wuji screamed, his voice cracking into a ragged, blood-flecked howl of utter, inescapable despair. He watched in helpless, slow-motion horror as the blazing blue pillar of death tore straight through their fiery defenses and slammed squarely into the outer perimeter of their pride and joy, the impenetrable, God-tier 9 heavens blazing sun array. The sound of shattering glass rang out with crystal clarity across the entire 10,000-mile valley. The red-gold shielding dome hailed for ages as an absolute, unbreachable fortress capable of repelling true immortals, fractured like a cheap window pane under a wrecking ball. A single hairline crack spider-webbed across the surface, instantly multiplying into millions of spider cracks before exploding outward in a blinding flash of concussive feedback. The colossal artificial sun hovering over the Sun Yang divine sect, the ancient anchor that had guarded their legacy for countless generations and served as their absolute security blanket, burst into a million harmless golden sparks like an overinflated party balloon popping against a pin, scattering shimmering dust across the scorched earth below. The instant the grand array shattered, every single high-ranking elder, supreme elder, and core node master charged with maintaining the shield convulsed in unison, vomiting great geysers of dark, congealed blood. Their spiritual signatures instantly plummeted into the abyss, their cultivation bases violently crippled, and their Dao hearts utterly pulverized into fine sand. Sect Master Zhao Wuji suffered the most humiliating fate of all. Struck by the catastrophic magical backlash, he collapsed into a twitching, boneless heap of rags on the stone floor, his eyes completely hollow and dead to the world as he stared blankly at the empty sky, mindlessly muttering over and over that everything was gone, that their supreme, unyielding ultimate defense had been casually blown away like a birthday candle by a single breath from an unbothered monster, completely shattering his sanity into irreparable pieces. Inside the vast emptiness of my own mind, I smacked my lips together in mild, slightly disappointed dissatisfaction, letting out an internal sigh that wondered why that little glowing lampshade had broken so easily and felt so astonishingly weak, as if I hadn't even had the chance to stretch my legs before the whole silly little light show was already over. With the catastrophic implosion of the nine heavens blazing sun array, an absolute, tomb-like silence clamped down over the entire landscape as tens of thousands of Sun Yang divine sect disciples stood frozen like terrified statues, their slack-jawed gazes locked onto the empty, smoke-choked sky while their brains violently rejected the impossible reality that their invincible, planet-baking ultimate defense had just been casually blown out like a birthday candle by a single, unbothered puff of air. Down in the mud, young master Zhao Haotian was shaking like a cheap washing machine with a wet blanket inside, his pants completely soaked in warm, terrified urine as a crushing tide of suicidal regret finally broke his ego, making him realize that picking a fight with a primordial world ender over a glowing fruit was roughly equivalent to poking a sleeping volcano with a toothpick and expecting a warm hug. Meanwhile, across the endless expanses of the central continent, the grand-scale crystal mirrors of every elite faction were broadcasting the jaw-dropping massacre in real time, leaving powerful figures like the human emperor in the Golden Divine Palace, completely thunderstruck as he stared at the aftermath of the atomic breath, and privately thanked every deity in the cosmos that the terrifying monster had chosen the sun-worshipping cult instead of his own divine dynasty. While over at the myriad sword immortal sect, elders stared at their trembling master swords with cold sweat dousing their spines, collectively agreeing to bump the Forbidden Zone's threat level up to do not look, do not speak, and definitely don't breathe too loud. Back at Ground Zero, completely oblivious to the global panic attack he had just triggered, my radioactive throat suddenly felt a bit parched from the minor exertion. Much like running a brisk 1-kilometer jog on a hot summer day, prompting my giant golden eyes to sweep across the defenseless volcanic complex below until they locked onto a thick, glowing, magma-like crimson river snaking around the main peak, which happened to be the sect's legendary sacred leyline water source used for refining weapons and boosting cultivation. Deciding it looked like a delightfully refreshing beverage, I dropped my massive snout toward the riverbank and inhaled with the suction power of a cosmic black hole, slurping up the entire multi-mile channel of liquid fire energy in a matter of seconds, like a giant drinking a slushie through a supersized straw, until even the ancient fire crystals at the riverbed were bleached, completely bone-dry into useless gravel. Letting out a deeply satisfying, earth-rattling burp that tasted vaguely like sugary lava, I mentally noted that the spicy juice had hit the spot quite nicely, while down below, the entire surviving population of the Sun Yang Divine Sect watched their sacred lifeline vanish into my stomach and collectively decided that passing out from sheer, unadulterated despair was probably their best remaining career option. As the grand defensive array and the sacred leyline river vanished in less than the span of a single breath, the two bedrock pillars supporting the Sun Yang Divine Sect for countless generations were utterly obliterated, reducing their mighty legacy to absolute rubble, while leaving behind a psychological trauma so profound that Sect Master Zhao Wuji instantly regurgitated a fresh geyser of dark blood and collapsed into a motionless, stone-cold faint. With their leader unconscious and their collective spines snapped in half, the remaining tens of thousands of elders and disciples stood paralyzed like hollow statues, realizing with terrifying clarity that running was pointless since no corner of the mortal realm could hide them from a god, and fighting back was a statistical joke when their ultimate weapons had been swept aside like tissue paper. Yet, completely contrary to their grim expectations of immediate slaughter, my simple reptilian mind was entirely focused on checking off the primary objective handed down by my daughter, demolishing the enemy's home base. Surveying the sprawling cluster of majestic crimson palaces built across the volcanic caldera through the lens of a toddler playing in a playroom, I decided that these fancy architectural marvels looked remarkably like a set of colorful wooden blocks that needed to be rearranged. Without a shred of malice or even bothering to spare the trembling ant-like cultivators a second glance, I reached down with my massive, scale-armored claws, unceremoniously ripped the sect's heavily warded treasury building straight out of the bedrock like a stubborn weed, and carried it over to a completely different mountain peak before slamming it downward to stack it awkwardly on top of the apothecary building, sending a glorious cascade of shattered roof tiles, ancient alchemical pills, and divine weaponry scattering across the dust. Utterly captivated by how surprisingly entertaining this impromptu home renovation project turned out to be, I leaned enthusiastically into the game, scooping up the Grand Elder's quarters, the main reception hall, and the disciples' dormitories to build a hilariously lopsided, multi-tiered apartment stack right over the central courtyard, turning the once terrifying sacred ground into a chaotic, dust-choking construction site where terrified mortals scrambled for their lives while dodging flying roof beams. Across the distant horizons, millions of high-ranking spectators watching through crystal scrying mirrors stared with dropped jaws and completely scrambled brains, entirely unable to process why a supreme, world-ending primordial entity had suddenly decided to play contractor and remodel an ancient immortal sect into a modern art disaster, while my loyal underlings like the demon ape nodded sagely to each other, absolutely convinced that every erratic block-stacking motion was actually a profound, cosmic display of supreme enlightenment rewriting the laws of spatial geometry. Watching the absolute chaos unfold, the demon ape stroked his jaw with an expression of profound, philosophical reverence, loudly declaring to the trailing dragon ghosts that the supreme overlord's erratic block stacking was not mere destruction, but a transcendental display of spatial geometry and the ultimate deconstruction of mortal order, prompting the surrounding specters to nod vigorously in awe as they convinced themselves they were witnessing the birth of a new cosmic Tao. While inside the dimensional pocket, the little empress watched her former oppressor's sacred sanctuary get warped into a humiliating, leaning Tower of Pisa disaster and felt a wave of icy, intoxicating vindication wash over her soul, remembering how her own imperial capital had once been burned to cinders by these very same solar flames, and realizing that reducing their proud legacy to a laughingstock was the sweetest appetizer imaginable. Unaware of the profound cosmic theories being drafted in his honor, I was currently having the time of my life wrapping up my masterpiece by deciding that the massive, volcano-anchored main peak itself would make the absolute best foundation piece to cap off my tower. So I shoved my giant claws 10,000 meters deep into the bedrock to pull it up, only to feel my fingertips brush against something wonderfully cozy and warm, much like sliding a freezing hand into a pre-warmed bed on a chilly winter night, which turned out to be a fist-sized, living nugget of pure, primordial solar god fire that had fallen from the actual sun a million years ago and served as the absolute life force and core heartbeat of the entire sect's subterranean ley lines. Deep in a hidden stone vault below, several near-mummified founding ancestors jolted awake in absolute horror just as I casually pinched the sacred flame out of the earth with two claws, lifting the glowing, squirming little spark right up to my giant golden eyes, and deciding that with its adorable warm glow and cute little wiggles, it would make a magnificent, high-end sparkler toy for my daughter to play with. Without sparing a second thought for the legendary artifact's historical value, I flicked my wrist and tossed the supreme divine fire straight into the dimensional pocket to join our growing collection of neat trinkets, completely oblivious to the fact that the moment I yanked out that core, all 9 subterranean fire dragon veins collapsed into dead gravel, the volcanoes instantly went cold, and the entire sect's spiritual life force flatlined in a matter of seconds. Within the span of a single lingering breath, the sacred sanctuary that fire cultivators spent countless lifetimes dreaming of was reduced to a completely dead, spiritually bankrupt wasteland, while a few ancient fossilized ancestors who managed to scramble out of their hidden caves stared at the withered ley lines and shrieked in absolute, soul-shattering despair over the loss of their million-year-old godfire source before one of them literally coughed up blood and exploded into fine gray dust from sheer heartbreak. Watching this apocalyptic stripping of their past, present, and future, every surviving member of the Sun Yang divine sect realized with cold, sickening horror that the cosmic entity towering above them wasn't just launching a regular raid. He was systematically erasing their entire lineage from the annals of existence with a level of terrifying, unyielding ruthlessness that left distant masterminds trembling behind their scrying mirrors. As they scrambled to upgrade the Forbidden Zone's threat level from absolute disaster to walking universal purgatory, down below, the hyperzealous demon ape wasted zero time in leaping through the rubble to pluck the trembling, piss-soaked Zhao Haoqian and the half-conscious sect master Zhao right out of the dirt with 2 massive fingers, trotting over like an over-eager puppy to present the primary culprits to me for execution. Just as I was about to dismiss the pathetic little specks as completely unworthy of my time, the little empress chimed in through our mental link with a devilishly sweet suggestion that completely bypassed the concept of a merciful death, proposing instead that the 2 disgraced aristocrats be sentenced to a lifetime of indentured servitude where they would have to preen feathers, hunt bugs, and wipe the beak of the 3-headed vulture king they had previously wronged. Highly amused by my daughter's brilliantly petty brand of psychological warfare, I enthusiastically approved the sentence, watching with mild paternal pride as the Vulture King proudly hoisted his new royal pets into the air, while millions of continental elites watched the broadcast and felt a cold sweat soak their spines at the sheer, soul-crushing humiliation of turning a sovereign sect master into a glorified bird feeder. Deciding that our family outing had successfully checked every box on the itinerary, I prepared to turn around and head back home, but as I lifted my massive foot, a faint metallic crunch beneath my toes made me pause, prompting me to look down and discover that my earlier architectural block-stacking games had completely smashed open the sect's legendary treasury vault, scattering millions of glowing gems, rare spiritual weapons, and priceless medicinal herbs across the pulverized dirt. Recognizing that letting shiny, colorful things go to waste was an absolute moral sin in any respectable household, I casually nudged my gaping underlings with the toe of my claw and told them to pack up every single sparkly trinket they could carry before we officially called it a day. With ecstatic, over-the-eager howls, the demon ape and the rest of the monstrous elite lunged into the ruined vaults like kids let loose in a candy store, aggressively vacuuming up every last glittering fragment of the Sun Yang divine sect's million-year accumulated wealth, while I casually flicked my wrist and dumped the entire haul of toys straight into the dimensional pocket, blissfully unaware that this mountain of stolen divine resources would soon serve as the cornerstone and primary venture capital for the little Empress's cataclysmic quest for vengeance. Mission fully accomplished, and utterly satisfied with our afternoon stroll, I scooped up my precious daughter, loaded up our newly acquired bird-feeding servants, and led our triumphant procession back toward the protective, fog-shrouded safety of the chaotic Forbidden Zone, leaving behind a ruined, spiritually dead wasteland and a mortal realm plunged into absolute, terrified silence. The very second my titanic, mountain-shattering mass stepped back across the sanctuary's border, the entire continent seemed to exhale a collective, lung-emptying sigh of relief as the suffocating Taichu pressure receded like a retreating tide. Over in the central continent's golden divine palace, the human emperor slowly uncurled his white-knuckled fists, watching the scrying mirrors reveal the smoking crater of the sun-worshipping sect before immediately issuing 3 draconian edicts, officially striking the Sun-Yang divine sect from the imperial records and permanently banning entry to their territory, dispatching lavish diplomatic tributes toward the east to appease the fringe domains, and strictly ordering every single citizen and soldier across the empire to give the chaotic Forbidden Zone a 10,000-mile-wide berth under penalty of instant banishment and total erasure. A humbling display of caution that was swiftly mirrored by every major superpower across the realm, instantly locking the Forbidden Zone into position as the undisputed sword of Damocles hanging over the mortal world. Meanwhile, entirely oblivious to the geopolitical shockwaves trailing in our wake, I was basking in the pure, unadulterated bliss of a successful family outing. Ah, home sweet home. Walking may have been a bit tiring, but the loot table was undeniably legendary. We had secured a magnificent glowing red dome to serve as an oversized nightlight, a cute little wriggling spark of sun god fire to act as a sparkling fairy wand for my daughter, and an enormous pile of miscellaneous shiny trinkets to round out the collection. Arriving back at our familiar, cavernous nest, I tilted the dimensional pocket and tipped the entire hall onto the stone floor in one massive, chaotic cascade. A tidal wave of blinding, prismatic aura erupted toward the heavens as an honest-to-goodness mountain of divine artifacts, peerless weapon scrolls, glowing elixir bottles, and rare heavenly herbs materialized out of thin air, filling the cavern with a spiritual density so intense that even a broken, rusted old sword blade lying at the bottom of the pile radiated enough ancient killing intent to make external sacred masters kill each other in a bidding war, and a single ordinary medicinal pill could instantly rocket a bottlenecked grandmaster straight to the next realm of enlightenment. The entirety of the Sun-Yang divine sect's million-year historical savings was currently sitting on our floor, looking roughly as dignified as a pile of discarded moving boxes, leaving even hardened Forbidden Zone overlords like the demon apes staring with dropped jaws and wide, saucer-sized eyes as they inhaled sharp breaths of cold air, privately marveling at how someone with the supreme, godlike grandeur of my stature could treat an entire continent's worth of legendary treasures with the casual, breezy indifference of someone dumping out the kitchen trash. Of course, I paid zero attention to their internal theological freakout, choosing instead to use the tip of my giant claw like a toddler rummaging through a sandbox to sort through the sparkling pile. "This iron lump is way too ugly, throw it out," I muttered mentally, casually batting aside a devastating warhammer inscribed with primordial divine runes as if it were a dirty stick, before turning my attention to a delicate jade vial. "And the candies in this jar are totally the wrong color," I added, completely, tossing aside a priceless flask of 9-clawed soul-reviving pills capable of dragging a dead man back from the afterlife. With a dismissive flick of my claw, a piece of ancient celestial silk armor, capable of repelling world-ending magic, was tossed aside like a dirty rag, simply because its soft texture didn't meet my strict standard for playthings, prompting the little Empress to watch through the dimensional pocket screen with a twitching eye and a bleeding heart as priceless supreme treasures like the heavenly hammer and 9 orifice golden pills were treated worse than old kitchen scraps. Ignoring her silent, existential agony, I carefully picked out a few dazzling, polished trinkets that actually passed the aesthetic vibe check. A translucent multicolored glazed heart, a string of warm spiritual pearls, and an ornate, gem-encrusted illusion sword. Deciding they would make the absolute best shiny toys for my daughter before casually waving my massive paw at the rest of the colossal treasure mountain and telling the drooling Forbidden Zone overlords they could divide whatever was left. The moment those words dropped, the demon ape and the surrounding beast kings looked like they had just been struck by divine lightning, their giant eyes bulging out of their sockets, as they processed the reality that an entire Supreme Sect's million-year treasury was being casually handed out like pocket change, sending a tidal wave of wild, cult-like ecstasy through the cavern as they dropped to their knees and roared their unyielding, fanatical loyalty to the heavens. Right on cue, a crisp, robotic chime rang out inside my consciousness, announcing that I had unlocked a brand new passive achievement called All Things Affinity, essentially turning me into a walking Disney princess who automatically boosted goodwill and tamed wild nature effortlessly. Though I barely had time to blink at the weird prompt before a tiny, rumbling tummy echo from the dimensional pocket reminded me that my number one priority was making sure my daughter got fed. Sweeping all other thoughts aside with a cheerful grin, I immediately pivoted to the most important task in the universe, firing up the stove and cooking up a proper meal for my favorite little human. Meanwhile, outside the cavern nest, the Forbidden Zone erupted into an unprecedented festival of wealth redistribution, as the demon ape stepped up to his role as chief treasurer, strictly preventing a chaotic riot, and instead organizing a structured, highly orderly distribution, where the three-headed vulture king hauled off the lion's share of top-tier magic tools and spiritual herbs as a well-earned reward for his stellar navigation and heroic service as our primary royal transport. With 3 pairs of eyes squinting into joyful crescents and the Dragon Ghost Legion proudly marching as the official ceremonial guard, the grand spoils distribution ceremony concluded in a wave of roaring applause that instilled an unprecedented sense of collective loyalty among the chaotic realm's apex predators, while over in a grim corner of the camp, the deeply humiliated former sect master Zhao Wuji and his weeping grandson Zhao Haotian found themselves cornered by a swaggering 3-headed vulture king, who wasted no time gleefully informing them that their royal bird feeding and feather preening duties were about to begin, instantly prompting a desperate Zhao Wuji to lunge headfirst toward a jagged boulder in a frantic bid to commit suicide, only for a casual wave of Forbidden Zone pressure to freeze him midair and prove once and for all that in this territory, dying without permission simply wasn't on the menu. Meanwhile, back inside the cozy cavern hearth, a mouth-watering aroma filled the air as I carefully prodded a pristine, midnight blue flame beneath a massive, roasted sub-dragon overlord I had casually caught in the forest earlier that afternoon, expertly carving off the most tender tenderloin with the tip of my giant claw and gently cooling it down before offering it to the little empress resting in my palm. Though the roasted beast meat was roughly the size of a small house compared to her tiny frame, a single bite flooded her exhausted meridians with a staggering torrent of pure, exquisite spiritual energy, bringing a genuine smile of familial warmth to her face as we shared a quiet, peaceful dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that out in the wider courtyard, stray elixir pills and leaking weapon energies from our discarded trash pile were already mutating local plants into towering spirit trees and sparking a spontaneous evolution wave across every low-tier beast in the valley. Just as I finished wiping down my makeshift kitchen workspace, a crisp, robotic chime echoed through my mind announcing the arrival of a brand new parenting quest, Knowledge is Power, which bluntly stated that a truly stellar dad needed to look beyond physical nutrition and start focusing on mental growth, instructing me to find suitable introductory reading material and teach my daughter how to write her very first character. Staring blankly at the system, prompt and deeply perplexed by the baffling exclusion of the Wisdom Halo passive ability which promised to boost the enlightenment, cultivation, speed, and comprehension efficiency of everyone in my vicinity by 100-fold, while pointedly leaving me out of the fun. I briefly wondered why the cosmos insisted on keeping a genius down before shaking off the thought and pivoting entirely to the new parent-teacher challenge of teaching my daughter how to read. Cracking this challenge required proper educational tools, and since sketching a giant number 1 on the dirt with a claw the size of a telephone pole would likely trigger a massive tectonic earthquake rather than a polite calligraphy lesson, I recalled the classic fantasy tropes of high-level cultivation manuals being etched onto precious jade slips. Leaving the little empress safely tucked away in her dimensional pocket, I strode over to the glittering remains of our newly acquired treasury mountain and effortlessly fished out several hundred pristine, ultra-rare nourishing spirit jade blanks originally used by the Sun Yang Divine Sect to record core heritage techniques. Deciding they made the absolute best oversized flashcards, I gathered an armful of the smooth, glowing tablets and returned to the nest, only to run smack into a second logistical crisis, finding a writing utensil delicate enough not to melt the jade into a puddle of molten glass. Inspired by a sudden stroke of genius, I reached into the dimensional pocket where I had tossed that cute little wiggling sunfire spark earlier, gently coaxing the primordial flame through my newly unlocked all things affinity passive, until the hesitant little divine spark willingly stretched itself into a razor-thin, golden-hot pen tip. Concentrating with the fierce dedication of a proud parent preparing his child's first preschool lesson, I carefully guided the living flame across the flawless jade surface to craft the most majestic opening character I could possibly conjure, the character for absolute dominance and supreme power, the word hegemony. Though my massive, clumsy claw strokes wobbled slightly like a toddler's first drawing, every single line burned deep into the jade, emitted an earth-shattering wave of fundamental creation, destruction, and chaotic order that far transcended mere human language, turning a simple flashcard into a primordial celestial scripture capable of making true gods tremble in awe. Staring through the screen of the dimensional pocket, the little empress watched in stunned disbelief as her oversized, well-meaning dad took priceless nourishing spirit jade, traditionally reserved for recording supreme holy heritage techniques, and burned a crude flashcard using the legendary sun god fire, leaving her feeling an agonizing mix of emotional whiplash and deep, helpless resignation over having such an overwhelmingly lavish yet bafflingly simple-minded father. Before he could start sketching out a second flashcard, my giant golden eyes suddenly twitched toward the jagged outer perimeter of the chaotic forbidden zone, where a faint, highly restrained aura was lingering like a hesitant little bug testing the waters outside a dragon's den. When the little empress caught the strange signature through her sensory link and expressed a sharp, deeply nostalgic curiosity about wanting to see what kind of visitor had wandered to our doorstep, I immediately set aside my flashcards, stood up to my full, mountain-shattering height, and took a single step across the continent to materialize instantly at the edge of the fog. There, kneeling atop a windswept crag with trembling knees and a reverent posture, was an old man in simple hemp robes holding a weather-beaten wooden box. He introduced himself as Qin Mu, a supreme elder of the ancient, reclusive Tianji Pavilion, an organization that didn't practice destructive combat magic or forge heavy weapons, but instead dedicated its entire existence to observing cosmic threads, tracking destiny, and recording historical truths. Only days prior, their sacred Tianji astrolabe had suffered a violent, unprecedented seizure, prompting their master to burn his remaining lifespan on a desperate divination to track an apocalyptic variable descending upon the wasteland, only for the final reading to return a baffling singular clue: daughter. Risking his life to uncover the truth of the world's fate, Qin Mu had spent 3 days and nights prostrating himself outside the fog, hoping for an audience, as my colossal, scale-armored head abruptly sheared through the dimensional fabric right in front of him, our golden pupils casting a warm, solar-sized glare that utterly froze the old man's blood and short-circuited his brain. The poor Tianji Pavilion elder pressed his forehead flat against the cold stone, swallowed his sheer terror, and cried out in a shaking, high-pitched rasp, "Junior Qin Mu of the Tianji Pavilion pays his absolute respects to the Lord of the Forbidden Zone. Junior has no ill intent." Before Qin Mu could even finish his desperate plea, he watched in absolute, heart-stopping horror as the colossal mountain-sized jaw slowly unhinged, revealing an abyssal throat capable of swallowing the sun and moon whole. "I'm done for. It's going to eat me alive," Qin Mu thought, his soul instantly plunging into the deepest abyss of despair as he clamped his eyes shut and braced for the end. Yet, the agonizing crunch of bone and the searing wash of primordial plasma never came. Instead, breaking the earth-shattering silence, a soft, crystal-clear, incredibly sweet little voice drifted out from the terrifying cavern of the monster's mouth like a divine spring in a wasteland. "Old Grandpa, what's that you're holding in your hand?" Qin Mu felt his heartbeat literally skip a beat, seized by an invisible, giant hand. The voice echoing from inside the world-ending beast was neither a soul-shattering roar nor a crushing wave of divine Tao scripture. It sounded precisely like the innocent, utterly curious toddler of a next-door neighbor, peering out with wide, unblemished eyes to ask a completely harmless question about a new toy. The bizarre, absurd contrast between that soft, childish inquiry and the universe-destroying scale of the Taichu entity towering above him short-circuited Qin Mu's brain entirely. His eyes snapped wide open, flashing with a frantic, disbelief-driven disbelief, as he stared past the golden fangs and finally caught sight of what was resting securely in the shadows of the colossal maw, a tiny, exquisitely porcelain doll-like human girl. Is it an illusion? A psychological torment cast by this primordial monster to break my mind? Qin Mu's spiritual senses went into overdrive, his ancient Tianji-piercing eye igniting deep within his pupils as he desperately tried to cut through whatever cosmic deception was at play. But no matter how many divination layers he stripped away, the relentless feedback of reality hammered a single, unyielding truth into his skull. It's real. There is genuinely a fragile human girl safely chilling inside the mouth of a world-ending leviathan, treating the most dangerous jawline in existence like a cozy second-story balcony. The realization hit him like a chaotic divine thunderbolt, instantly frying what little remained of his worldview into fine ash. Flashes of his master burning away his life essence to divine two simple words. The daughter suddenly clicked together into a terrifying, jaw-dropping puzzle. This primordial terror, this ancient existence that walked out of the chaotic forbidden zone to make the entire continent soil its collective robes, is a doting dad, and his precious daughter is a seemingly defenseless human child. Qin Mu felt as though his tens of thousands of years of bitter cultivation had been completely wasted on chasing fairy tales that paled infinitely in comparison to this absolute madness. Deep inside the safe harbor of the dimensional pocket, the little empress watched the petrified hemp-robed elder through her panoramic display and found the entire scene immensely entertaining. She knew full well that projecting her voice through her oversized dad's mouth would trigger an existential earthquake in the old man's worldview, but she loved every second of it. In her past life as a Supreme Empress, every word she uttered was heavy with sovereign mandate and unapproachable majesty. Now, she could effortlessly pull the strings of the world's destiny while hiding safely behind the biggest, most indestructible umbrella in existence, an addictive, wonderfully novel thrill. "Old Grandpa, why aren't you saying anything?" The little empress chimed in again, tilting her head with feigned innocence. "Did you come here to play with my dad?" Up above, thinking his daughter's social skills were simply the most polite and charming thing in the cosmos, I shifted my colossal, star-crushing frame slightly to angle myself into what I fondly hoped looked like a warm, friendly grin, blinking my giant golden pupils with deliberate slowness to keep from looking too aggressive. Unfortunately, my definition of friendly closely resembled a tectonic shift. As my massive head drifted downward, the entire horizon seemed to tilt, and the sheer atmospheric displacement of my eyelashes fluttering caused a gale-force hurricane capable of flattening a 1,000-foot mountain range to sweep across the crag. Qin Mu was blown violently backward, his hemp robes whipping wildly as his heels skidded across the stone, nearly sending him tumbling into the abyss while his spiritual energy flickered like a dying candle in a typhoon. "Why, Junior? Dare not!" Chin-Mu shrieked, instantly abandoning all self-preservation as he thrust the ancient wooden box high above his head with trembling, bloodless hands, his voice cracking from sheer terror. "Junior Chin-Mu, of the Tianji Pavilion, by order of our pavilion master, has come specifically to present a congratulatory gift to the young miss." He didn't dare drop the Lord of the Forbidden Zone title carelessly, but his instincts screamed that the absolute center of gravity, the ultimate weak spot of this terrifying monster, was the little girl sitting inside its mouth. Courting favor from the boss's daughter was the only play left on the board. "A gift?" The little empress's curious, melodic voice echoed again from within my throat, laced with genuine intrigue. "Is that for me?" "Yes, yes. Exactly so." Chin-Mu gasped like a drowning man, clutching a floating log, nodding so fast, his neck practically clicked as he groveled further into the dirt. This is a peerless treasure refined by our TNG pavilion over 10,000 years, extracting the quintessence of starlight from the nine heavens and the marrow of ley lines from the nether depths. This is TNG Dao Milk, the supreme treasure of our TNG pavilion. Though it possesses no raw offensive power or cultivation-boosting side effects, it excels entirely at nourishing the soul, opening spiritual apertures, and washing away karmic dust, making it ideally, perfectly suited for a fairy child of the young Mrs. Heaven-defying talent. Chin-Mu blurted out his entire sales pitch in a single breathless rush, tensing every muscle as he anxiously waited for his verdict. He wasn't exaggerating. Tianji Dao Milk was the rarest, most jealously guarded asset in the pavilion's history. A mystical fluid typically reserved for cultivating the next generation of sect masters, harvested through centuries of grueling astral alignment. Their pavilion master had practically emptied the sect's ultimate emergency reserves just to fill this single box, all to buy a shred of goodwill from the terrifying entity looming before them. Deep inside the dimensional pocket, the little empress's eyes instantly flared with bright, knowing recognition. She knew the legendary reputation of Tianji Dao Milk all too well. In her past life as a sovereign empress, she had once offered an entire divine dynasty's annual tribute just to acquire a single drop from the Tianji pavilion, only to be flatly rejected under the cold excuse that cosmic destiny could not be bartered to outsiders. Never in her wildest dreams had she expected the pavilion to hand over a full box on a silver platter. Though her current reincarnated body was a flawless congenital sacred fetus, her soul was a scarred, war-torn remnant of her former imperial life, leaving a hairline fracture where her consciousness failed to achieve absolute, seamless integration with her mortal vessel. This Tianji Dao Milk was precisely the miraculous medicine she needed to heal those soul-deep microfissures. "Dad," he says, "this is my bedtime milk," the little empress whispered immediately through the mental link, adopting the sweetest, most irresistible tone in her arsenal. Milk. At the mention of nutrition, my parental instincts locked on instantly. A growing kid needed calcium, and this polite, well-dressed old man suddenly looked like the most thoughtful, competent vendor in the entire cultivation world. "All right, we'll take it." With a slight nod of my massive, mountain-shattering head, I signaled my approval. Before Chin-Mu could even process the motion, I extended a single, pitch-black, metallic-scaled claw tip that completely dwarfed his entire body, radiating a spatial distortion strong enough to crack the fabric of reality. "It's over. Is he going to crush me along with the box?" Chin-Mu squeezed his eyes shut in pure despair. Yet, the apocalyptic impact never came. Instead, he felt a touch so impossibly gentle brush against the underside of the wooden box. Blinking open his eyes in sheer disbelief, he witnessed a miracle of physics. The terrifying claw tip capable of piercing through immortal mountains was handling his fragile gift with the delicate precision of a surgeon holding a newborn feather, utilizing a microscopic layer of spatial wrinkling to ensure that zero kinetic shock ever touched the wood. Absolute, unbridled violence paired with absolute, breathtaking tenderness seamlessly merged into one. Is this the legendary level of control a primeval entity has over its own power? Chin-Mu's soul reeled from the sheer awe of it. Meanwhile, feeling rather pleased with our new milk supplier, who clearly possessed far better manners than the loudmouth folks over at the Sun Yang Divine Sect, I channeled a wave of approval through my mental broadcast. "You've done well." To me, it was just a casual pat on the head. But to Chin-Mu, that simple wave of intent hit his consciousness like a booming tidal wave of pure enlightenment, instantly clearing away thousands of years of stubborn mental bottlenecks and leaving his soul transparent and crystal clear in a blinding flash of epiphany. Thank you for the senior's praise. Thank you for the senior's divine guidance." Chin-Mu wept, tears of absolute joy, kowtowing repeatedly toward empty space long after my colossal form had phased back into the Forbidden Zone's fog. Stumbling back to his feet with shaking legs, cold sweat soaking his hemp robes, a feverish, burning light lit up his eyes. He knew he had to race back to his pavilion master immediately to report the earth-shattering truth. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone wasn't a mindless butcher of legend, but part of a doting, cosmic family consisting of an overpoweringly nonchalant dad and a mysterious little princess holding the strings of the world. Back inside the cozy cavern nest, I carefully placed the precious box of Tianji Dao milk on a smooth rock, saving it as a warm evening treat for later, before turning my attention back to the urgent matter at hand, our education crisis. Picking up the heavy, chaotic nourishing spirit jade tablet where I had just burned the character for hegemony, I positioned it squarely in front of the dimensional pocket's panoramic screen. Time for class, sweetie. Repeat after Dad, I rumbled gently, doing my absolute best to soften my thunderous telepathic frequencies into a cozy teacher's tone. Inside the dimensional pocket, the little Empress stared at the lopsided, terrifyingly powerful character etched onto the jade, feeling a dizzying, highly complicated cocktail of emotions churn deep within her chest. She was, after all, the blood-soaked, universe-conquering Supreme Empress who had once forced 1,000 races to their knees. Yet here she was, sitting cross-legged in a cozy pocket dimension, being handheld through a preschool literacy lesson by an oversized, delightfully simple-minded god of destruction. Though her past life was that of the peerless, blood-soaked Supreme Empress who made 1,000 races bow in terror, she found herself sitting cross-legged inside a pocket dimension, letting out a silent, resigned sigh as she played along with her oversized, delightfully simple-minded dad's preschool literacy lesson. Only for a crisp, cold system chime to ring out the very instant she muttered the word back. Ding! Main quest: the untimely enlightenment completed. Reward unlocked. Wisdom aura, passive, 100x comprehension boost for everyone in the territory except the host. While I mentally chalked up the 100x intelligence boost to a simple gardening trick that would make our backyard grow nicer flowers, an invisible wave of profound cosmic insight quietly swept across every inch of the chaotic forbidden zone. Inside the dimensional pocket, as the sweet, velvety Tianji Dao milk melted across her palate to heal the micro fissures in her soul, the absolute floodgates of cosmic understanding suddenly blew wide open in her mind. Her supreme past life scripture, the 9 revolutions reincarnation scripture, automatically unfurled before her consciousness, its flaws instantly stripped away, its energy circulation optimized, and its final realm pushed far beyond her previous peak, as billions of brilliant epiphanies surged through her soul like a geyser of divine light. How is this possible? The little Empress's jaw dropped in sheer disbelief, realizing with a pounding heart that the ridiculous intelligence-boosting aura was tied directly to her dad's weird rewards. Out in the wider expanses of the valley, the exact same supernatural phenomenon was turning the entire Forbidden Zone upside down. The demon ape, who had spent days staring at the lopsided palace block mountain I had haphazardly stacked earlier, with a splitting headache trying to decode its supposed spatial geometry, suddenly felt a mental lock click open inside his skull. In a blinding flash of epiphany, he realized the jumbled architecture wasn't a spatial puzzle at all, but a profound display of destruction, reinvention, and the brutal reality that might makes right. I understand everything. The demon ape roared with sudden, earth-shaking laughter as his bottleneck of thousands of years shattered into dust, his demonic energy skyrocketing toward a higher plane of existence, while he wept tears of absolute religious fervor and slammed his forehead into the dirt toward my nest. The great dad has descended his divine grace to enlighten me. Across every corner of the chaotic forbidden zone, beasts, trees, and spirits alike began experiencing miraculous breakthroughs in unison, turning our backyard into a roaring crucible of instant, accelerated cosmic evolution. Deep in the black waters of the western marshes, a 1,000-year-old black water serpent suddenly snapped open its murky eyes, a spark of true sentient intelligence flickering within its gaze for the very first time. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why have I spent all this time just sleeping underwater? The scenery up on the shore actually looks rather nice. Perhaps I should go take a look. Shaking its massive head, the serpent heaved itself onto dry land for the first time in its existence, beginning to seriously ponder the ultimate mysteries of reptilian life. Simultaneously, high up on a towering, 10,000-foot cliffside, an ordinary, unremarkable purple spirit herb swayed without a single breath of wind as a crystal-clear dewdrop slowly condensed upon its leaf, radiating a spiritual energy 100 times denser than before. Across every square inch of the chaotic forbidden zone, a miraculous, unprecedented, silent evolutionary wave was taking full effect. Countless low-tier beasts awakened their minds. Ordinary blades of grass mutated into precious medicinal herbs, and even cold mountain rocks began to rhythmically inhale and exhale the ambient breath of heaven and earth. Under the radiant influence of the wisdom aura, this already vibrant realm was pressed down on a 10,000-fold speed fast-forward button, charging forward at a terrifying, God-fearing pace straight toward the likeness of an ancient mythic realm. And the instigator of it all? Completely oblivious. Tucking his head down after a long, heavy yawn, I felt a familiar wave of sleepiness pull at my eyelids. Sweetie, Daddy's going to take a little nap. Play nicely by yourself, I murmured internally, before lowering my mountain-sized body into the most comfortable position possible and settling in for my favorite daily pastime, absolute relaxation. However, the moment my giant golden eyes shut tight, a cataclysmic explosion tore through the western edge of the Forbidden Zone, instantly followed by a column of chaotic, sulfurous demonic energy erupting into the sky like a roaring column of smoke. Heaven-hunting demon butterfly, you dare try to steal my Tao Enlightenment Stone, you're courting death. Cut the crap, Nine Nether Sparrow. This rock has sat right here for millions of years, and today I was the first to unlock its profound mysteries. It shares a karmic fate with me, it's mine. Two apex beast kings who had ruled their respective territories in peace for centuries suddenly clashed in a blind, unrestrained frenzy over a seemingly ordinary rock at the base of a cliff. The earth shivered violently, thousand-foot peaks collapsed under the shockwaves of their collateral blows, and the concussive ripples radiated outward through the soil until they crashed directly against the perimeter of my nest. So loud, I furrowed my brow in irritation, shifting my massive body over and lazily tossing my tail over my ears to block out the noise so I could go back to sleep. But the sounds of battle only grew more frantic, escalating in volume and drawing closer by the second, thoroughly ruining my peace and quiet. Inside the dimensional pocket, the little Empress's delicate face darkened slightly. She understood the inevitable side effect of the wisdom aura all too well. The beasts and spirits of the territory, previously limited by rigid instincts, had suddenly experienced a hundredfold leap in comprehension, instantly recognizing the true value of all the divine treasures and rare herbs they had walked past for ages. With the old balance shattered, territorial disputes were a mathematical certainty. "Daddy, they're so noisy. They're disturbing your baby," she pouted softly through our mental link. In a fraction of a millisecond, the giant golden eyes I had just closed snapped wide open. A chilling, sadistic, absolute pressure capable of freezing spacetime and crushing ancient stars burst outward like a waking cosmic black hole, instantly blanketing every corner of the chaotic forbidden zone. I can tolerate a lot of things when I'm trying to sleep, but when the noise wakes up my daughter, the nature of the problem just crossed from an annoyance into an unforgivable catastrophe. The chaotic abyss trembled as two ancient titans clashed, their sheer arrogance echoing through the void like a bad stand-up routine at an open mic night. The hunting sky demon butterfly and the nine nether sparrow traded blows that tore the fabric of space apart, treating the apocalypse like it was just another casual Tuesday afternoon. They were convinced they were the undisputed kings of this realm, fighting over a cosmic treasure as if it were the last slice of pizza at a frat party. But their little turf war came to an abrupt halt when the air itself suddenly froze, heavier than a Monday morning meeting after daylight saving time. A presence so overwhelmingly absolute descended that even the laws of physics decided to take a coffee break, silencing the blazing inferno and the spatial storms into absolute nothingness. The two mighty beast kings, who usually made entire sacred lands tremble in sheer terror, were instantly reduced to the status of frightened toddlers caught red-handed with their hands in the cookie jar. Suspended in the air above them was Lu Qing'an, a figure whose cold, godlike gaze could make a glacier sweat, looking down with all the warmth of a disappointed landlord inspecting a stained carpet. As the two trembling beasts groveled in the dust, their minds racing through 1,000 catastrophic scenarios of divine wrath and eternal damnation, the grand cosmic overlord had a completely different train of thought entirely. Honestly, they were just making way too much noise and waking up his daughter, which was a cardinal sin far worse than any ancient law of the universe. With a flick of his mind, a summon went out across the Forbidden Realm, dragging every single self-proclaimed king, monarch, and terror lord out of their lairs and straight into an impromptu homeowners association meeting. Dozens of terrifying beasts materialized in the valley, sweating bullets as they stared at the shivering butterfly and sparrow, whispering to each other like nervous coworkers wondering who was about to get fired. Clearing his throat with the solemn authority of a suburban dad about to lecture the neighborhood kids for trampling his lawn, Lu Qing'an addressed the chaotic assembly, his psychic voice demanding to know why two grown mythical beasts were throwing punches over a shiny rock. When the trembling butterfly weakly confessed that it was all for a piece of stone, Lu Qing'an inspected the legendary nine-orifice exquisite stone with the critical eye of a dad trying to figure out if a random pebble could be glued into a handmade necklace for his kid. As one of the ambitious demon emperors tried to suck up by explaining the immeasurable value of the Tao stone and throwing his rivals under the bus, Lu Qing'an simply decided that if it was a good trinket, it definitely shouldn't be risked in a playground brawl, effortlessly pinching the priceless artifact between his claws and snapping it in half with a casual crunch that left every single legendary beast frozen in sheer, unadulterated horror. The legendary Tao stone snapped like a stale piece of biscotti under his claws, leaving every single beast king frozen in absolute, soul-crushing agony as they watched a priceless cosmic treasure get treated like a cheap juice box. With all the therapeutic fairness of an exhausted parent dividing a single candy bar between two screaming toddlers, Lu Qing'an tossed one half to the sparrow and the other to the butterfly, casually declaring that sharing is caring and screaming is a federal offense. As the two devastated kings clutched their ruined, half-priced artifacts with smiles faker than a reality TV apology, Lu Qing'an decided it was high time to lay down some foundational parenting rules for the neighborhood, announcing that from now on everything in the domain belonged to everyone, but they had to wait in line, use their words instead of their claws, and most importantly, keep it down because it was nap time for his kid. While these directives sounded like basic playground diplomacy to him, they hit the ultra-enlightened beast kings like a sudden spiritual awakening, completely redefining their entire worldview with all the intensity of a late-night infomercial revelation. To their hyperactive imaginations, the concept of waiting in line wasn't just about sharing rocks, it was a profound cosmic blueprint to establish a utopian divine kingdom, transforming them from chaotic monsters into civil servants of a celestial daycare. Even the demon emperor dropped to his knees in a wave of religious fervor, leading the entire assembly in a chorus of synchronized worship, while praising the supreme intellect of a master strategist who clearly just wanted some peace and quiet. Meanwhile, tucked away in her dimensional pocket with a juice box in hand, Gu Zhaoxiu watched her lovable goofball of a dad accidentally convert an army of bloodthirsty mythic beasts into devout followers through pure, unfiltered dad energy, making her past life's grand political schemes look like a game of tic-tac-toe. As the improvised community seminar wrapped up and Lu Qing'an zoomed off to finally get some uninterrupted sleep, the remaining Beast Kings stood up with eyes burning with zealous purpose, fully convinced they had just been handed the sacred constitutional handbook for the greatest divine empire in the multiverse. The chaotic expanse of the primordial Forbidden Zone had somehow transformed into a full-blown homeowners association meeting gone horribly wrong, largely because an apocalyptic skyscraper-sized lizard just wanted to catch some Z's without the local wildlife treating him like a jungle gym. Stepping up with the swagger of a corporate middle manager who had finally tasted absolute power, the demon origin emperor planted his flag and declared that all natural treasures were now public property under the newly minted Order Bureau. Pointing dramatically at a jagged peak, he ordained it as the bureaucratic headquarters where everyone had to register their loot according to merit and merit alone, smoothly spinning a casual, groggy sleep talk from their slumbering titan god into a sweeping constitutional decree that would make Machiavelli proud. Inside the dimensional pocket, Gu Zhaoxiu watched through the translucent barrier with the hollow expression of someone witnessing a fever dream come to life, listening, as this army of brain-boosted beast kings earnestly treated a sleepy toddler's rambling as the gospel truth. Because honestly, who needs logic when you have divine real estate? Shaking his head at the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the universe, he tuned out the bureaucratic circus outside, uncorked a vial of celestial nectar, and took a slow sip. The hyper-refined energy cascaded down his throat like liquid starlight, instantly going to work on the fractured remnants of his soul left over from his cataclysmic downfall, while his innate wisdom aura supercharged his cognitive faculties to furiously reconstruct, optimize, and push every ancient martial art from his past life past their absolute limits. At this blistering rate of metaphysical optimization, he wouldn't even need training wheels or external crutches to reshape his spiritual pathways within half a year, laying down a foundation so ridiculously sturdy it made his previous life look like a house of cards built on quicksand. There was no need to rush, he reminded himself with the calm perspective of someone who had already died once. After all, his past demise was entirely due to being a show-off edgelord, whereas this time around he had the ultimate cheat code, an overpowered, casually terrifying dad who happened to double as a walking extinction-level event, giving him all the time in the world to play the long game. But right as he was sinking deep into the euphoric haze of his rapid ascension, the colossal mountain range body of Lu Qing'an outside suddenly shifted, signaling that the big guy had finally woken up from his nap. To be entirely precise, he hadn't so much woken up as he had been violently summoned back to consciousness by the hollow rumbling of his internal bioreactor after burning through a caloric mountain of energy, prompting him to beam a mental broadcast straight into the dimensional pocket with a casual, "Hey kiddo, you hungry?" Gu Zhaoxiu blinked, looking down at his completely flat stomach, which was currently doing cartwheels of pure satisfaction thanks to the divine juice he had just chugged, but knowing full well that this was just his sleepy powerhouse of a father projecting his own midnight snack cravings onto his kid, he decided to play along with a cheerful, "Yeah, Zhaoxiu is starving and wants some meat." That was all the encouragement the celestial beast needed, because feeding his daughter was basically his love language and his consciousness. Vast and sweeping like a rogue weather system instantly expanded across his backyard garden of a forbidden zone in search of the ultimate menu items, only to quickly realize there was nothing good in the fridge. The Beast Kings were too busy playing middle management with their new zoning laws. The newly evolved local critters looked like literal toothpicks lacking any substance, and the leftover magical artifacts from the Heavenly Sun sect tasted like shattered glass. Suddenly remembering those crunchy, energy-dense snack packages from the sex treasury that the other monsters had greedily hoarded earlier, he decided it was time for a late-night grocery run. Projecting his omnipotent sensory net far beyond the borders of the Forbidden Zone and sweeping across the continent like a cosmic kid, scanning a grocery store aisle. To a being who casually manipulated gravity and tore through space like wrapping paper, the entire mortal realm was basically just an oversized walk-in refrigerator, and as his perception washed over bustling imperial cities, towering immortal sects, and deep abyssal oceans, he found them all a bit too cluttered with synthetic junk food that didn't meet his rigorous culinary standards for pure, unadulterated energy. That was until his divine radar suddenly snagged on a desolate, time-warped ancient battlefield tucked away in the western wastes, a forgotten pocket of the world, choked with screaming negative karma, and buried deep beneath the earth, where an enormous subterranean vault of ancient runes was currently sealing away something terrifyingly crunchy. A jet-black, nightmarish set of ancient armor etched with the writhing faces of the damned, radiating an aura that practically screamed premium forbidden snack. The ancient demonic armor was trembling faintly, radiating an aura of malice so dense and concentrated it practically begged to be thrown into a dehydrator, pulsing with pure, unadulterated energy that somehow looked, felt, and smelled suspiciously like 1,000-year-old, extra-spicy beef jerky cured by the gods of chaos themselves. Jackpot, Lu Qing'an thought, his eyes lighting up with the sudden, terrifying clarity of a dad who had just found the exact snack aisle his picky kid wanted, completely oblivious to the fact that his casual cosmic radar ping had just sent an ancient, blood lineage Guardian clan straight into Code Red DEFCON 1 panic. Down in the subterranean vaults, the Guardian clan's monitoring systems were currently melting into slag as the seal's energy spiked off the charts, prompting a chorus of frantic shouting about unknown dimensional entities encroaching on the Nine Nether demonic artifact and desperate pleas to wake the ancestors before something ate them all. Meanwhile, the oblivious architect of this localized apocalypse couldn't care less about the underground real estate drama. His single-track mind was entirely focused on securing that spicy meat snack for his daughter's midnight booster meal. With a casual warp of space, his mountain-sized silhouette simply blinked out of existence back at the Forbidden Zone, leaving a bewildered council of monster kings still locked in a legendary, high-stakes philosophical debate over whether the security lions at the Order Bureau entrance should be chiseled from basalt or black jade. Welcome to Chapter 35, Dad's Special Care Package Beef Jerky. Out in the jagged, wind-scoured expanses of the western Black Peak, Gobi, a wasteland universally known as a mortal graveyard, and a cultivator's ghost town where nothing survived except howling gales and spiteful wraiths, sat the hidden ancestral sanctuary of the Firekeeper clan, 10,000 leagues beneath the crust of the earth. The silence of the deep subterranean corridors was abruptly shattered by a series of heavy, rhythmic, earth-shaking thuds echoing through the iron-forged tunnels. At the absolute core of the complex, inside a massive basalt amphitheater, hundreds of elite guardians clad in blazing red runes stood on high alert, their cultivation bases individually terrifying enough to make external sect masters look like toddlers playing with plastic swords. All eyes were locked on the center of the ritual platform, where a complex matrix of ancient glyphs was flashing erratically, holding a grotesque, jet-black suit of armor that shivered with enough kinetic fury to rattle the tectonic plates. "Ancestor, the seal is buckling," coughed an elder, blood spraying from his lips as the magical node he was anchoring splintered like cheap glass under the demonic pressure. The Nine Nether armor is waking up 100 times angrier than it did during the Millennium Cycle. Atop the altar, an emaciated ancient patriarch named Yan Tianzun snapped his eyes open, revealing glowing pits of condensed fire instead of pupils. "It's not waking up on its own," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding in a blender. "Something out there is fishing for it." Before anyone could panic further, Yan Tianzun's fiery gaze pierced upward through 10,000 leagues of solid stone, catching a glimpse of something that made even an immortal cultivator's blood run ice cold. A passing divine sense that wasn't even hostile, but rather carried the casual, soul-crushing indifference of a homeowner looking down at an ant colony while walking to the mailbox. "For 370,000 years, our lineage has guarded this terror," Yan Tianzun muttered, rising slowly to his feet as a sea of crimson flames erupted from his withered frame, roaring, "Prepare for our final stand." Hundreds of warriors echoed the battle cry, their martial spirits surging toward the ceiling. Led by Yan Xiao, a arrogant, sharp-faced prodigy holding a blazing spear who was honestly just thrilled to have an excuse to blow off some steam after centuries of staring at dark rocks. But right as the clan hit peak cinematic hype, the sky above the Gobi didn't just darken with storm clouds. It blinked out of reality entirely, replaced by a pitch-black void, as if a cosmic curtain had been dropped over the entire continent. Yan Tianzun whipped his head up, his fire-infused eyes widening in sheer disbelief as he realized the shadow wasn't a cloud, it was a single claw, and just one of its razor-sharp scales was noticeably larger than their entire subterranean fortress. This wasn't an ancient demon lord or a rogue calamity. This was an entity operating on a totally different existential tax bracket, turning young Yan Xiao's heroic spear-waking ambitions into a bad joke as his weapon trembled violently against his will. Without even bothering to squeeze his entire astronomical physique through the rip in reality, Lu Qing'an casually reached a massive arm through the tear in space, ready to grab his takeout. Extending a single colossal claw straight down from the dimensional rift to grab his midnight snack, the apocalyptic beast peered through the glowing energy shield below at the swarm of ant-sized mortals scrambling around like panicked picnic guests, mentally noting with casual approval that the packaging was at least tightly sealed before slowly pressing his massive paw down toward the ritual altar. "Initiate the heavenly fire, world incineration, grand array." Yan Tianzun roared with every last drop of his mortal strength, unleashing a desperate, blinding pillar of golden fire straight up from the ruins of the subterranean vault. A torrent of thermal energy theoretically capable of flash-boiling oceans and melting immortal saints in a heartbeat, representing 370,000 years of accumulated defensive arts, slamming directly into the towering scales above. But as the column of roaring plasma collided with the Titan's claw, it fizzled out like a single teardrop hitting a red-hot frying pan, evaporating instantly without leaving even a microscopic smudge, prompting Lu Qing'an to not feel so much as a pinch of pain, but rather the vague sensation of someone blowing a gentle, warm breath against his knuckles. "Oh, is it still heating up? Not bad, not bad," he muttered with mounting enthusiasm, speeding up his descent by a fraction, and with a deafening crash, the Guardian clan's proudest, allegedly unbreakable defensive matrix shattered into a billion fragile pieces of colored glass. Shockwaves ripped through the subterranean chambers, sending elite warriors flying backward in geysers of blood as the entire complex began to cave in on itself. But Lu Qing's targeting was dead on, his massive talons pinpointing the frantically vibrating, malice-spewing nine-nether demonic armor right at the center of the altar. Yan Tianzun's eyes threatened to split straight out of their sockets if that armor broke free and spilled its trapped miasma. A million-mile radius would instantly transform into a wasteland of death. When suddenly, something happened that reduced every single survivor to absolute, unadulterated speechlessness. The gigantic claw casually pinched the writhing, screaming demonic artifact between two massive fingers, just like a human casually plucking a noisy cicada off a summer porch, effortlessly lifting it straight off the ritual platform. Inside the dimensional pocket, Gu Zhaoshu snapped out of his meditative trance instantly, his senses prickling with the familiar, deeply revolting stench of concentrated malice. The nine-nether, demonic armor. He gasped it aloud in sheer horror, remembering how this exact ancient weapon of mass destruction had been wielded by a ruthless archenemy in his past life to slaughter entire star systems until it took a coalition of multiple immortal dynasties to barely seal it away. Why on earth was his idiot dad going out of his way to pick a fight with this cursed thing? Panic surging, he scrambled to the glowing viewport just in time to see Lu Qing holding the legendary apocalyptic armor between his fingertips like a dirty piece of trash. "Dad, drop it. That thing is filthy. You can't eat it." Gu Zhaoshu shrieked at the top of his lungs, terrified that his garbage disposal of a father would literally swallow a multi-era backlog of dark curses, toxic resentment, and cosmic bad vibes that would give even an immortal Godzilla a legendary stomachache. Huh, filthy. Lu Qing paused halfway to his mouth, looking down at the squirming, screeching bundle of dark energy dangling near his toes. "You're right, kiddo. A bit dirty. Didn't wash it." Realizing his mistake with the casual enlightenment of a chef, he nodded sagely. "Besides, eating raw meat is bad for digestion. Better grill it first, gotta practice good kitchen hygiene." And thus began Chapter 36, treating an apocalyptic demonic armor like a late-night snack, while supreme artifacts get tossed around like chew toys. Opening his cavernous jaws, Lu Qing'an didn't bother roaring. Instead, a narrow, hyper-concentrated beam of deep blue atomic breath, tuned specifically to low-heat convection mode, silently lanced out and enveloped the demonic armor in a precise culinary toast. The nine-nether armor, which had spent millennia terrorizing mortals and broadcasting pure psychological trauma, let out a genuinely shocked, high-pitched shriek of absolute agony as the faces etched into its metal melted away like snowflakes in a blast furnace, purging every single trapped ghost and primordial curse down to the subatomic level in less than 3 seconds. When the blinding blue light finally faded, the once pitch-black, nightmare-inducing artifact had been transformed into a crystal-clear, ruby-red piece of translucent art radiating pure, pristine thermal energy without a single trace of evil residue. Down in the smoking ruins, Yan Tianzun and his surviving clan members stood frozen with their jaws hitting the dirt floor, staring in stunned silence as the ultimate existential nightmare they had guarded for nearly 400,000 years was casually cooked to perfection. "Well, looks clean now, and it smells amazing," Lu Qing murmured with profound satisfaction, snapping up his freshly grilled snack and vanishing into the ether, leaving the subterranean wastes of the Black Peak Gobi in an absolute, graveyard-like stillness. It took a long time for a shell-shocked Yan Tianzun to finally crawl out of the rubble, his cloudy eyes staring up at a sky that had inexplicably cleared of all terror, moving from blank confusion to overwhelming, tearful joy as he realized the generational curse binding his family line was just gone. Stumbling over like a deflated balloon, the once proud genius Yan Xiao dropped his long-forgotten spear into the dust and whispered what everyone was thinking, asking his patriarch in a hollow daze, "Ancestor, what on earth was that?" "A god," Yan Tianzun breathed softly, letting the wind carry away the last of their ancient burdens. Stepping through the world with the absolute, unshakable swagger of a true divinity walking among mortals, the young genius Yan Xiao couldn't even process the full scope of that colossal existence, knowing only that a single passing claw had utterly shattered every known rule of reality, rendering saints and ancient emperors alike down to the pathetic status of microscopic ants. "The divine being took the armor away," Yang Xiao murmured in a daze, only for the old patriarch Yan Tianzun to slowly shake his head with a bizarre, twisted smile playing across his withered lips, correcting him gently. "No, Yan Xiao. The god didn't take the armor away. He roasted it as a snack." Following a brief, heart-stopping silence that hung over the subterranean ruins, the entire survivor camp erupted into a deafening roar of earth-shattering celebration, realizing the cursed nightmare was gone and crying out tears of pure gratitude to the merciful god who had cleared away their ancestral plague. They began to cheer like madmen, with some even dropping to their knees to kowtow frantically toward the direction where Lu Qing'an had vanished, their centuries-old terror seamlessly transforming into an unyielding, zealous worship of that supreme entity. Clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white, Yan Xiao stared out toward the direction of the primordial forbidden zone with an intense, burning fire blazing in his eyes. A fierce ambition to go out and seek that divine being, even if it meant catching just one more fleeting glimpse of that majestic, world-shaping silhouette, effectively turning an ancient and powerful guardian clan into Lu Qing'an's very first batch of wild, fanatical acolytes. Meanwhile, back in the Forbidden Zone, the newly minted Order Bureau spearheaded by the Demon Origin Emperor was already taking shape in full bureaucratic glory, complete with a massive monument carved from 10,000-year-old suspended gold rock, standing proudly at the entrance. Elegant dragon script calligraphy danced across its surface, outlining the Bureau's newly established emergency regulations. Article 1. Everything within the Forbidden Zone belongs to the Big Boss and his daughter, while we merely act as caretakers. Article 2. All natural treasures must be registered and queued up based on merit and actual need. Article 3. Private brawls and loud shouting are strictly prohibited, with violators facing an immediate 100-year resource freeze and solitary confinement, all signed off by Grand Manager Demon Origin Emperor. Inside the bustling bureaucratic hall right at that moment, a hilarious turf war was playing out as the nine-headed serpent Guanyin and the blazing golden crow argued themselves red in the face over priority access to the ninth turn spirit spring. Lord Grand Manager, I've lived in the water my whole life. This spring is practically built for my cultivation. I should go first. The serpent hissed, only for the golden crow to snap back. Shut up, lizard. I practice solar palace arts and desperately need this yin-balancing spring water to break through. I've been waiting in line for 3 days. As the bickering escalated, Demon Origin Emperor slammed a glowing, 10,000-year-old thunderstruck wooden gavel down onto his 1,000-year soul jade throne with a booming silence. Desperately trying to channel Lu Qing'an's effortless aura of absolute authority while ruling. Queuing is based on first come, first served, but practical need matters too. You two split it 3 days each, and if you argue again, neither of you gets a drop. Just as these ambitious monster kings were busting their humps to maintain hard-earned civil order, a terrifyingly familiar and suffocating pressure descended upon the zone once more. The big boss is back. Every single beast king shrieked in unison, instantly dropping to their knees and bowing deeply in unified panic as Lu Qing'an's colossal silhouette loomed across the sky. Ignoring his cowering subordinates entirely, the titanic beast beamed like a proud parent showing off a school project, broadcasting straight down, "Hey kiddo, daddy's back. Look what nice stuff I brought you." With a gentle flick, he handed over the newly grilled, ruby-red, crystal-clear 9-nether demonic armor that was still radiating pure, sacred energy. Inside the dimensional pocket, Gu Zhaoshu stared at the terrifying artifact that had caused him countless headaches in his past life, now being casually handed over to him like a piece of cotton candy, feeling his soul detach from his body in sheer disbelief. Are you kidding me? Sure, it had been purged down to its atomic level and converted into a top-tier divine artifact, but the mere psychological trauma of its past resume made his stomach churn violently. Dad, I don't like this, it tastes weird, he lied through his teeth, trying his absolute best to politely decline. Huh? Tastes weird? Lu Qing'an paused, scratching his massive head in mild confusion since it smelled incredible to his monster palate, before reasoning. Must be a bit overcooked. Oh well, if my daughter doesn't like it, I don't want it either. Just toss it. With a casual shrug, his giant claw unspooled, letting go of an ultimate supreme artifact that could have easily driven countless eternal divine dynasties into a bloody civil war. Boom! The heavy treasure dropped with absolute precision right smack in the middle of the Order Bureau's Grand Hall, cracking the unbreakable suspended gold floor into a massive crater. Every single Beast King slowly lifted their heads from the dirt, their jaws hitting the floor as they stared blankly at a stone radiating such terrifying, unfathomable Tao pressure that even their high-level senses couldn't even begin to comprehend its material. The big boss. He just rewarded us with a supreme treasure. Demon Origin Emperor, Guanyin, and the Golden Crow gasped simultaneously, their collective breathing turning ragged, as their high-functioning intellects instantly calculated that this single rock was 10,000 times more valuable than all the spiritual springs combined. The newly established laws had barely dried on the monument, and the ultimate test of civilization had arrived. Because against this level of absolute, game-breaking temptation, the fragile boundaries of law and order were about to snap like a twig. Chapter 37. The Demon Lord's Declaration of War, and over at the Heavenly Mystery Pavilion's global headquarters. That impossibly majestic stargazing observatory suspended 9 heavens above the mortal world. Pavilion, Master Qing Tianji coughed up a violent mouthful of fresh blood, his face turning paper white as he stared in absolute horror at the destiny compass that had just shattered into fine, irrecoverable powder, whispering in trembling disbelief. How is this possible? How is this possible? He muttered to himself, his eyes brimming with utter disbelief as he stared at the horrifying realization that the 9-nether star, which had successfully suppressed the Western barren demonic realm for nearly 400,000 years, had just been extinguished just like that, completely without a sound. Elder Qin Mu hurriedly stepped forward to steady him, shouting urgently, "Pavilion Master, quick, use whatever price it takes, calculate who did this." A moment later, a hazy divination pattern materialized across a crystal screen, revealing a blurred giant beast accompanied by an even fuzzier little girl, causing Qin Mu to sharply intake a breath of cold air and gasp, "It's them again. He immediately reported everything he had witnessed outside the primordial forbidden zone, plunging Qing Tianji into a long, suffocating silence. That master of the forbidden zone acted entirely on impulse and whimsy, completely devoid of any human logic. Just to amuse his daughter, he could casually obliterate an immortal sect, and just to tidy up his backyard, he could purify a demonic realm that had plagued eternity. Closing his eyes, Qing Tianji let out a long, heavy sigh laden with equal parts relief and boundless despair, murmuring that this was both the greatest fortune and the absolute greatest misfortune of the world, before issuing a supreme pavilion decree. From this day forward, the primordial forbidden zone was officially classified as a divine domain where no one was allowed to approach, speculate, or discuss it. Everyone was simply ordered to sit back and watch how things unfolded. While the heavenly mystery pavilion chose the path of prudent silence, not everyone was smart enough to follow suit. Separated from the Black Peak Gobi by a treacherous expanse known as the Sea of Death, the Myriad Demon Cave stood proudly as the #1 demonic sanctuary of the Northern Realm, and deep within its innermost sanctum, inside a towering throne room, constructed entirely from countless bleached human bones, sat the undisputed lord of the cave, the blood-plotted demon sovereign.